Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 2881, The Legendary Fire Crow. Laquisha's preternatural fire had always been considered to be one of the mysteries in the divine land. In the early days, even Samuel didn't know about why it existed. Since Laquisha left the divine land, her cultivation base had improved greatly. She was able to hone her preternatural fire even if she did not know where it came from. It soon dawned on Zen just how serious things were. The counterattack of the fire. He asked with his heart beating rapidly in his chest. What happened to her? Elvinia heard the anxiety in Zen's voice. She was actually skeptical about Zen's identity, and his reaction confirmed her guess. This has nothing to do with you, right? She replied with a cold smile. Tell me, what happened to her? Zen clenched his fist and stepped closer. His aura grew boldly. He left the girls with Elvinia because he thought that the Phoenix Palace was a safe place as it was the core of the whole Oneness Sky Palace. He didn't expect anything bad to happen. Now he was worried. Zen's reaction surprised Elvinia. He was standing directly in front of her with the veins of his neck bulging in anger. Elvinia summoned a golden whip and charged it at Zen's face. Zen snickered. The divine flames of the Sun Crow race had already failed to harm his physical body while he was in the Source World. It was much less of a threat to him right then. He reached for the divine flames and broke the golden whip into pieces. With the other hand, he grabbed Elvinia by the collar and shouted, "Tell me." She's fine," Elvinia stammered. "Why are you so angry?" she added with a trembling voice. A huge wave of relief swept over Zen. For a moment, he was calm. And then he quickly realized Elvinia's real purpose. It was obvious that she was testing him. Elvinia calmed down and sneered. "You are indeed a disciple of our Oneness Sky Palace, Thad. Or should I call you Zen?" Zen's eyes widened. His identity was finally revealed. He could no longer deceive Elvinia. What she had just said meant she'd been suspicious of him for a while. Zen sighed. "Is Laquisha really okay?" he asked once more. "My mother helped her. How could she not be fine? Once her bloodline is activated, her strength will greatly increase. She has such a great talent. It would be a great pity if she wasted it by staying by your side all the time," remarked Elvinia. Her bloodline. Zen's brows furrowed. There was no doubt that Laquisha was Samuel's biological child. Although the bloodline of the Han clan was certainly not bad in the Divine Land, it was nothing special in the Source World. According to Elvinia, Laquisha seemed to have a rare bloodline. She has the Fire Crow bloodline. Her fire is called the Sprite Fire, Elvinia explained. The Fire Crow is a legendary bird with a crane-like body, a single leg, and a white beak. It's a kind of firebird. Its presence means that a fire-related disaster will occur. The fire that took place in the Phoenix Palace has proved this legend. Fire disasters. Zen recalled Laquisha mentioning this in the past. When she was a child, she was unable to control her preternatural fire. She would cause a fire from time to time. The Han clan had to arrange a private palace for her. Elvinia's words coincided with that story. But why and how did Laquisha acquire such bloodline? Even if the Han clan had any kind of blood inheritance, it could only be related to the Nine Li race. Zen could not understand how the Fire Crow could have anything to do with their bloodline. "You haven't been honest with me. I've been so good to my 3 disciples." Elvinia gazed coldly at Zen as she continuously produced divine flames of the Sun Crow race to heat the pot. She was able to bond with Laquisha and the other girls previously. While they did not disclose their origins, they did talk about their relationships with Zen. Dorothy hated Elvinia, especially after Zen had saved her from the other shore. At that time, Elvinia wasn't able to figure out Zen's identity. She was in awe of him. If she didn't figure it out this time, he would have pretended to be someone else for much longer. Elvinia knew that she wasn't regarded as much by Zen. She hated the feeling as any woman would. Zen gave a wry smile and said, "The fact that my corporeal body can enter the other shore can't be known by many people." Elvinia became silent. She went on letting out the divine flames and was lost in thought. The flames hissed. Once the green powder was inside the burning crystals and under high temperature, it turned into fine green threads. These threads spread in all directions like blood vessels and erupted almost silently. The burning crystals cracked. Then, these burning crystals all became rice-sized crystals. The pot was eventually filled with clear colorful rice. Zen could even smell a calming scent of flowers. "It looks gorgeous," Elvinia commented. She did not stop heating the pot. Eventually, the rice-sized crystals melted and turned into a translucent thick liquid. Finally, it was almost done. Zen suddenly remembered something he had to do. He swiftly turned and walked towards the other side of the wooden hut. He pulled down the white cotton threads hanging on the wall, twisted them into wicks and put them into vessels of various lengths. Then he picked up the big pot and poured the liquid into the vessels. Zen carefully and calmly did his task as if it wasn't his first time to do such work. If Elvinia hadn't been stuck with Zen, she would have thought that Zen had been working here for a long time. He had the perfect skills, after all. "I figured out the method through the few items in this hut. Once the wax solidifies, then it's done," Zen explained. "Can we try to light up the candles we made?" Elvinia asked. "Let's try." Zen nodded. In no time, the wax was already dried up and densely packed together, turning into white candles. Elvinia pointed at a candle, and a golden flame rushed towards it. However, no matter how many times the flame got in contact with the wick, the candle wouldn't light up. "There must be a specific way," Zen said nonchalantly as though he had already expected the result. Elvinia sighed. "So how can we leave?" she asked in a hesitating voice. Zen rubbed his chin to think. "Maybe if we could finish the task in advance, the three-eyed boy would let us go," he said. No matter what they had to do, he couldn't let her take out the candles in her space ring within a short time. He didn't even bring up this option. After comforting Elvinia, he put more burning crystals in the big pot and spread the green powder on them. She continued to heat them up. Then he held the vessels in his hand and pulled out the embedded candles one by one. They continued to work in harmony for at least 10 hours. Soon after, they had more than 40 candles. After using up all the burning crystals, Zen and Elvinia finally had the time to rest. They leaned on a wall of the wooden house, and rested as they waited for the three-eyed boy to return. Chapter 2882, Stealthy Communication. The mysterious black was deep and all around, blocking all eyes from seeing anything. Nothing but loneliness was left in the dark region. Previously, the other disciples had been there with them, but even then, they had found it hard to resist this lonely and gloomy feeling. Now that Zen and Elvinia were left alone, the uncomfortable feeling overwhelmed them even further. The huts had seemed mysterious and fascinating when they had seen them from the other shore. But once they were inside them, they knew they were nothing but candle workshops. This disappointing fact added to their depression, especially after they found that their freedom had been taken from them. "The other disciples will return to the Oneness Sky Palace and report our situation to my mother. She is going to be so worried," Elvinia murmured, staring at the flickering candlelight that was casting ghostly shadows around them. "You are right, but her worries won't take us out of here," Zen remarked, shaking his head and heaving a sigh. They had no way of leaving the other shore. The illusion-breaking rune had been rendered useless, and they couldn't be forcibly woken up by friends in the outside world, either. And no matter how powerful Flamen was, she couldn't descend from the upper stages of the other shore to come to their rescue. In fact, even Eastern Emperor Tai and Yasemin couldn't find a way to help them at this point. The other shore was a special type of place. Most of the time, it could be considered safer than most other places in the source world. Almost all kinds of predicaments could be faced using the illusion-breaking rune only. However, if someone were unable to get out, then the other shore would become the most dangerous place. "What if the three-eyed boy refuses to let us go?" Elvinia asked. "Right now, I don't know," Zen replied briefly with a shrug. If they continued with this topic, it was highly likely that Elvinia would mention the candles hidden in her space ring. Therefore, Zen decisively stopped the conversation. They waited in front of the hut for another 2 hours. Suddenly, the blue twin stars emerged in the dark sky above them, and the ground beneath them began to shake. "The giant ape is back now," Zen muttered, his eyes flashing into alertness. The first time they had seen the three-eyed boy, he and the giant ape had appeared together. Going by that, the giant ape's return could be considered a sign of the three-eyed boy's return. Still, Zen was worried that the three-eyed boy would merely hide himself in the darkness around them, choosing to observe them without being noticed. Several loud thuds resounded in the darkness as the ground continued to shake. Before long, the sound ceased abruptly somewhere close to the hut. A giant hairy hand stretched out from the darkness and spread at the door of the hut. Then, the three-eyed boy stepped down from the giant ape's palm. He had been bloodstained all over his body when they had seen him before. But now, he was injured even more severely. One side of his face was scraped very badly, and his arm was covered with several lacerations. Numerous small, black bugs were wriggling and biting the flesh within his wounds. These black bugs, Zen mumbled. Despite the extraordinary experiences and insights he had, Zen felt an inexplicable sense of fear in his heart when he saw the black bugs, as if they were the nemesis of the physical form of all creatures. The three-eyed boy got down in front of the hut and stretched out his hand. The candle that was burning in front of the door flew into his hand, which he circled around his arm, shining the light at the black bugs on his wounds. Some sizzling sounds could be heard when the light fell on the bugs. The black bugs seemed deathly afraid of the candle. They had been greedily biting the three-eyed boy's arm, but when the candlelight fell on them, they crazily writhed in pain. Very soon, they dropped down dead. The boy waved his arm slightly and shook the remaining corpses to the ground. As if noticing the careful gaze Zen was casting at him, the three-eyed boy explained flatly, "These black helmet bugs are not afraid of fire. They fear only light." All the creatures in the dark region were afraid of light, including the three-eyed boy himself. However, some of them were powerful enough to endure the candlelight for quite a long while others would quickly succumb to the light. In front of their very eyes, the black armor bugs' corpses on the ground were very soon neutralized by the candlelight and they vanished into thin air. The strange thing was that the corpses of the black helmet bugs emanated a faint black light before they completely dissipated. Zen noticed the phenomenon and wondered, does everything in the dark region conflict with the substances of the outside world? While Zen was still focused on observing and thinking, the three-eyed boy spoke up, "Show me the fruits of your effort. If you can't prove your value, it will be pointless for me to keep you here." "So will you let us go?" Elvinia asked in surprise. Zen sighed to himself and thought, Elvinia is so naive. The three-eyed boy merely sneered in reply and walked into the hut. As soon as he entered, his eyes fell on the candles placed in the corner. Zen had collected the candles he and Elvinia had made and placed them together. The vessels had also been returned to their original position. The three-eyed boy glanced at the candles for a while before he reached out and grabbed one in his hand. He then nodded with a satisfied expression on his face. "Your first candles are good enough. I will spare your lives so you may work for me," he said. Hearing his comments, Zen finally heaved a sigh of relief. The three-eyed boy then fetched more burning crystals from another hut below. He placed them at the center of the third hut. Together, the crystals made a big pile on the floor. After giving them a few more orders, the boy jumped onto the giant ape's palm and left in a hurry. The ground shook severely as the boy and the ape galloped away. Zen and Elvinia watched them until their figures vanished into the darkness. Very soon, the place returned to silence. "He seems in quite a hurry, doesn't he?" Elvinia said. "You were right, his injuries are getting worse each time, and he stayed here for a much shorter period this time," Zen nodded. Since the creatures of the dark region couldn't survive long in the light, it meant that the three-eyed boy would have to pay a certain price if he wanted to stay in the candle light for any period of time, especially if that period was long. This was an obvious assumption. The more serious the boy's injuries grew, the more trouble he would have staying in the light, which was why he had to come and go in a hurry each time. Zen pondered over his assumptions as he threw a few burning crystals into the pot. After he had poured some green powder over them, he asked Elvinia to release her divine flames to melt the crystals. While Elvinia was releasing the divine flames, she suddenly asked, "We can't light up these candles. I am wondering how the three-eyed boy lights them up." Zen shook his head and replied, "I don't know, but I have a feeling these candles we made are unfinished. I think that he conceals the last stage from us." Zen was wondering why Elvinia had suddenly raised such a question when she waved at him and said, "I believe there are at least 3 candles that we can light up. What do you think?" 3 was the exact number of candles Dorothy had handed over to her secretly. Elvinia had attempted to inquire about them, but had been interrupted by Zen every time. She understood that he wanted to conceal them from the three-eyed boy, and therefore, decided to ask about them cleverly. Zen instantly understood the undertone of her words and replied, "Yes, I suppose so. We may give it a shot after the work is done. But there's no hurry for now. In any case, the three-eyed boy doesn't seem that bad. Maybe he'll let us go at the right time after we make enough candles for him." "I agree," Elvinia nodded. She was smart enough to get Zen's real meaning. The 3 candles from Dorothy could be lit up, but right now wasn't the time. They would light up the candles and escape only when the time was ripe. Some distance away in the dark region, the three-eyed boy was sitting in the giant ape's palm and healing himself. Beside him, a round black curtain was floating in the air gracefully. If creatures from outside the dark region looked into this curtain, they would see nothing. The curtain would just be that for them, a curtain. However, through this black curtain, the three-eyed boy could see every movement of Zen and Elvinia, as well as hear their conversation. "Let you go, huh, in your dreams?" The three-eyed boy sneered and waved his hand. The round black curtain disappeared immediately. The burning crystal mine had been taken over by the black monkeys. They were very strong creatures, and successfully plundering the burning crystals from them was no small achievement. The three-eyed boy had recently obtained a large amount of those burning crystals, but the price was that he had suffered a lot of injuries. Fortunately, his candle workshop had already been on. The drudges he had found, a human male and a female, were quite efficient, therefore, he had decided on working hard to plunder more crystals now. Chapter 2883, Wounded. Every single time the three-eyed boy returned, he would carry along with him some burning crystals. If there happened to be too many burning crystals, he would stuff them into the huts below. But if there were not many burning crystals, he would toss them directly to Zen. At the beginning, the three-eyed boy was indifferent to Zen and Elvinia. But eventually, after they got to see each other more often, he grew more comfortable and friendly with them. Once, the three-eyed boy even brought back a small mountain of burning crystals and took out a small black toad. As the toad was revealed to light, its body began to emit traces of black light. He handed this toad to Elvinia as a gift. With a nasty glimpse at the dark strange creature, Elvinia, of course, was in no way going to accept this. Just then, the three-eyed boy directly threw the toad to her. The moment it came into contact with her, it seeped into her soul. Then, Elvinia felt that her soul force began to surge. It turned out that the black toad was actually more effective than soul crystal itself. Elvinia was in shock. The three-eyed boy scoffed coldly and walked away. Meanwhile, Zen continued to study the properties of the dark region. Every time the mission of making candles was completed, Zen squatted outside the hut and sat at the junction of candlelight and darkness, trying to understand the properties of the dark region. He took down some pieces of wood from the corner of the hut, carefully placing them in and out of the darkness. For some reason, the wood sticks remained unchanged. In addition to this experiment, Zen also poked candles into the darkness. Still, when he took them back, the candles didn't alter in any way. It should be because of the energy. He gasped. Like candles, the wood sticks from the hut didn't possess any energy fluctuation. The materials that didn't contain energy fluctuation or the other shore power could freely go in and out of the dark region. Sands, stones, the souls of light, and corporeal bodies on the other shore all contain some level of energy. If these things fell into the dark region, something would definitely occur to them. Elvinia, Zen called out, excited. Elvinia walked over with an unwilling expression on her face, but she still took out another shore token from her space ring. Zen's corporeal body could not carry the Sumeru space, so he could only study with Elvinia's things. The other shore token Elvinia took out was an ancient sword, which was said to have been found and retrieved from stage 12. With great caution, Zen held the ancient sword in his hand and slipped its tip into the darkness. He had no clue what was occurring in the darkness, but he definitely felt the energy fluctuations from it. When Zen pulled the sword back, the sword tip was missing, as if it had been trimmed off by the darkness. At the sight of this, the faces of Elvinia and Zen changed dramatically. They remembered that when they crossed the wooden bridge behind the Grand Sky Temple, many disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace fell into the darkness. Although they knew what happened to them, death, they never thought that the dark region was so cruel to living beings in the light. Zen stared at the front end of the ancient sword and thought for a while. Then he suddenly thrust the sword into the darkness and struck the ground. Before the sword disappeared completely, Zen began to press it down as he pried some type of substance from the ground into the light. It was only black soil, but under the candlelight, it melted like the snow in summertime as it released its energy. The light and darkness are as incompatible as fire and water. In theory, if we enter the dark region, we would just meet our own deaths. In the same way, the creatures in the dark region, like the three-eyed boy, the red python and the human monkey monsters, should then die once exposed to the light of the candle. Zen was tremendously dumbfounded, but they didn't. What keeps them unharmed by candlelight? And can we use such things too? As long as he was free, Zen would spare no time to do anything else except study. However, Elvinia was not very interested in such things. All she could do was to support him in any way that she could. In fact, Elvenia wanted to chat with him about the Phoenix Palace and her 3 disciples. But whenever she asked Zen where he came from, the man responded with silence. She eventually learned to just let go of the topic for good. However, the more Zen refused to tell her, the more curious she became. She had made up her mind that if she could survive this time, she would have to interrogate the 3 disciples when she returned to the Phoenix Palace. The 3-eyed boy already knew that Zen and Elvenia were trying their best to escape, but he never attempted to stop them. Because they were confined to the small hut, their resources proved to be limited and were simply not enough to allow them to enter the dark region. In some sense, the dark region held them like prisoners. "This is for you." When the 3-eyed boy returned this time, he threw a handful of green fruits right towards Zen. Without hesitation, Zen took the fruits, and stuffed them into his mouth, as if he was famished. Not long after he swallowed them, he felt like his internal organs began to burn within him. The fruits that grew from the dark region continuously released energy, and the energy had directly turned into Zen's physical strength. Zen's physical strength increased very slowly, but surely. Compared to the other shore power that came from the other shore token, his physical strength was meager. However, with the help of the fruits, his strength increased rapidly, which took him by surprise. Looking at Zen's surprised expression, the 3-eyed boy was a bit proud. He said, "Work hard here, and you will benefit in the future." Although the 3-eyed boy seemed to have ice in his veins, he was quite generous to them. There were great treasures everywhere in the dark region, all of great value. Days passed and they were almost weary. There was no difference in day and night on the other shore. But Zen thought ahead, and he made sure to keep an accurate record of it from the very beginning. He and Elvenia had been in the candle workshop for 3 months, and they had made about 1,000 candles. In desperation, Elvenia repeatedly hinted towards Zen that after the 3-eyed boy and the giant ape had left, they would just light candles and escape. However, Zen had been a bit hesitant about this idea. If the 3-eyed boy had been monitoring them or had set traps in the surroundings, they would be in trouble. There was only one chance for them to escape, and Zen must remain extremely cautious to ever succeed. It was the first week of the 4th month, and Zen and Elvenia were hard at work to make wax. Just then, they began to feel the ground shake. With a quick glance at each other, they wondered why the boy had returned so soon. As they approached the door, they were met once again with the huge hairy hand stretching out from the darkness. Dark red blood began falling from it, like a red rain. Because the blood belonged to the dark region, it released energy and quickly disappeared when the light from the candle met with it. "Whose blood is it?" Zen frowned slightly. Bang! The giant ape's hand unfurled after landing on the ground, and Zen and Elvenia let out a large gasp. The 3-eyed boy was lying in the palm of its hand, drenched in goopy blood. His skin was bitten by probably numerous monsters. Zen and Elvenia had no idea whether he was dead or alive at this point. Chapter 2884, A Strange Black and White Tree. The blue twin stars floating in the darkness continued its descent. Then, the giant face of the ape appeared in the candlelight. Seeing the face of the ape up close, Elvenia felt a little scared. She took a few steps back and hid behind Zen. "Don't be afraid," Zen reassured her. The ape's face slowly came near Zen. Afterwards, a huge gap appeared in it as it opened its mouth to speak. The voice that came out of it was a bit muffled. "Save him." The words of the giant ape were quite unclear. It seemed like it wasn't used to speaking the language of humans. However, Zen and Elvenia heard it clearly. "You want us to save him?" Zen looked a bit hesitant. He only had limited treatment methods on the other shore. Furthermore, the 3-eyed boy was from the dark region. Basically, his structure was very different from theirs. Swoosh, swoosh, the giant ape covered the top of the hut with its enormous hands. It did a pressing down motion, meaning that it would crush the hut down. At the same time, its mouth opened and said, "If he dies, you'll die too." If it did crush the hut with its hands, Elvenia and Zen would absolutely die. They wouldn't have any chance to escape. Zen had no other choice now but to save the 3-eyed boy. "How will we be able to save him?" Elvenia asked in despair. Zen carried plenty of soul pills, soul crystal, and even some special soul treasures inside his space ring. Unfortunately, these secret treasures could only save the souls of light, not the flesh body from the dark region. Besides, his space ring wasn't with him. "I can give it a shot," Zen replied, but he wasn't entirely confident. Even though his body was unable to use Shade Stone on the other shore, it could still activate the cinnabar field. Thus, he might still be able to utilize the power of the other shore tokens. The same thing could also be applied to the godly ways. Despite the fact that it sounded crazy to use a godly way to treat the creatures from the dark region, Zen had run out of options. The huge ape did not seem smart, but there was no doubt that it would do what it said. Simply put, if they managed to save the three-eyed boy's life, they would live. But if he died, they would die as well. Zen squatted down, getting close to have a careful examination on the three-eyed boy. The boy's eyes were closed as he was lying motionless on the ground. Zen stretched out his hand and pressed his fingers against the boy's neck. As his skin came into contact with the boy's skin, he immediately felt a burning sensation. Sizz. Zen's fingers were burned black. Meanwhile, the three-eyed boy's neck was also marked with black fingerprints. No matter what, the energy of the dark region would always melt that of the light. Zen already predicted that kind of reaction. However, this was truly troublesome. It complicated things even more. The energy of the life godly way would work completely against that of the dark region. There was only a faint possibility that they would be able to save him. At that point, the only thing Zen could do was release the internal momentum from his cinnabar field. A strong aura of life emanated from the life godly way. This green aura swiftly curled into a wisp. As Zen gently pointed at the three-eyed boy with his finger, it swept towards him. Sizz. Sizz. The green aura was able to heal the wounds of humans quickly and effectively. When it touched the body of three-eyed boy, however, it corroded his body instantaneously. It left black earthworm-like scars on his body. As he saw what happened, Zen stopped at once. What's going on? What happened? Elvinia asked in a serious and worried tone. He is from the dark region. All of our treatments are like fatal poison to him, Zen replied. Who? The giant ape that hovered above the hut also saw what happened. Its huge eyes displayed a hint of sadness. It obviously had a deep relationship with the three-eyed boy. Now, it realized that there was a high chance the three-eyed boy would die. Naturally, this caused distress to it. Crack. Sizz. Sizz. A teardrop with the size of a huge wooden barrel fell from the giant ape's huge eye. This teardrop also belonged in the dark region. It quickly dissipated as it passed through the candlelight. Meanwhile, it continuously released energy. Witnessing this, Zen's heart skipped a beat. Suddenly, he stood up and gestured at the giant ape. He asked loudly, "Why, are you not hurt even when you're in the candlelight?" Ordinary articles of the dark region would be immediately destroyed in the candlelight. However, the creatures of the dark region that Zen had ever met were not quite scared of the candlelight. The truth behind this must be simple enough. Maybe it was just very easy to resist the candlelight in the dark region. Otherwise, the mere act of making candles would be courting death. Who? The giant ape looked confused. Zen thought for a moment and then jumped up and pulled a long hair out of the giant ape's hairy hand. After that, he threw the hair into darkness and pulled it back from it. At the same time, he asked, "Why, are you not afraid of the light?" The giant ape stared back at Zen and appeared in thought for a long time. All of a sudden, it made a sound coming from its throat and showed an expression of understanding. The enormous face and pair of equally enormous hands hastily left the candlelight and dove into the darkness. Boom, boom, boom. Its footsteps thundered loudly away from them. Watching the giant ape leave at such a brisk pace, Elvinia asked, "Do you think it really understood what you said?" She seemed concerned. Maybe, Zen answered. He was unsure of it either. Elvinia gazed at the three-eyed boy lying on the ground. And then she faced Zen and said, "Let's run away now. In any case, that giant ape looks stupid. It won't be back in such a short time. Now that this boy has fainted, it is our chance to escape." Zen's face displayed a hint of uncertainty as he gazed at the face of the three-eyed boy. It was true that now might be the best time to escape. In addition to that, he didn't have a deep relationship with the three-eyed boy. Nevertheless, it was still difficult for Zen not to save him. Moreover, he was already getting along with him for the past days. Anyway, the most crucial thing for Zen right now was to determine how the creatures in the dark region were able to survive in the candlelight. He wondered whether it would be possible for him to come and go in the dark region whenever he wanted. After pondering for a while, Zen told Elvinia, "The wooden bridge is very long. The giant ape might be returning already before we can pass through the bridge. We will still be caught by it." Elvinia searched Zen's face and looked at him with a conflicted expression on her eyes. There were actually a lot of opportunities for escape they could have seized these past few months. But, Elvinia noticed that Zen was reluctant to leave. In any event, Zen could have escaped from the area of the hut as long as he lit candles. He could just run along the wooden bridge to leave here. She was aware of what Zen was thinking. Despite that, she didn't say anything. For some unknown reason, she was not in a hurry to leave as well. Even if she was scared most of the time within the candlelight, she felt secured and calm somehow. She wasn't too anxious to run away. But it didn't matter if she wanted to leave now or not. The opportunity had already slipped through their fingers. Merely 3 minutes later, the giant ape had returned swiftly with its footsteps still causing the ground to tremble. Clatter. Without warning, the giant ape inserted a large tree into the area shown by the candlelight. They estimated the height of the tree to be about 10 feet. It had a normal shape but its colors were very peculiar. They noticed that the branches, leaves and fruits on the left side were jet black while those on the right side were snow white. It was unbelievable that a tree produced leaves and fruits with two completely different colors. Eat, not afraid of, the ape said as it gestured towards the black fruit and touched it with its fingertip. Light. Chapter 2885, Treat the Boy. Zen gave the strange black and white tree an astonished look. This plant in front of him was incredibly strange and new, something he had never seen before. The giant ape's words were vague but he heard them clearly. He was now certain that his speculations were completely right. There was indeed something here in the dark region that could make those creatures immune to candlelight, something not that rare that even the red python and human monkey monsters could get. The two kinds of fruits of this tree right in front of him. Zen pointed at a white fruit. What about that one? The giant ape also pointed at the fruit. Eat, not afraid of darkness. This white fruit was useless to the creatures of the dark region since they were born in the darkness, but it was a different story for those that came from outside the region. Elvenia and Zen looked at each other, exchanging a hopeful realization between them. If they ate this white fruit, would it perhaps be possible for them to walk freely in the darkness? The giant ape continued to point to the fruit. You, eat it. It had been inspired by Zen. Zen was not a living creature in the dark region, so the internal momentum of his life godly way had the ability to hurt the three-eyed boy. However, what if Zen merged with the dark region? It was with this curious thought that the ape found the tree, uprooted it, and carried it all the way back to the young man. Whatever, Zen shrugged. He had already eaten a lot of strange foods, so he had no problem taking a bite out of this white fruit. He grabbed one off the tree and casually put the entire thing in his mouth. As soon as he swallowed, Zen felt a soft energy spread from his stomach to his entire body. It was powerful and it didn't stop, even going as far as seeping into his cinnabar field. As he let this strange energy flow through him, Zen began to notice a few changes. The dark region had previously been dark. The only light in this place came from the candles in the giant ape's eyes. However, upon eating the fruit, Zen found himself slowly being able to make out the shapes of things around him. He saw the blurry shadows of the mountains, various trees, and paths. Zen could now see the dark region. How is it? Elvenia asked. Zen walked to the edge, gently stretching his hand forward. He was a bit nervous, especially when his fingers reached the border. He hesitated for a few moments, debating whether or not he should insert his hand into the darkness. Knowing that he would never really know the result unless he tried, Zen willed himself to cross the border and into the dark region. As soon as he did, he felt the gentle energy thrum underneath his fingertips and resisting the darkness. It works, Zen exclaimed happily. The white fruit had changed his body, allowing him to walk in the dark region. He knew it was far too early to celebrate though. They still needed to deal with the matter regarding the three-eyed boy. Since he now had the ability, Zen figured that he should use the life godly way in order to save the boy. Buzz! A ray of green light spiraled out of Zen's body, casting an energetic aura around him. Rain of life. The green light coalesced above the three-eyed boy and formed a sort of fluffy green cloud. The internal momentum then turned into raindrops that fell on the boy's body. Zen's internal momentum of the godly way no longer came into conflict with the three-eyed boy. Instead, it began to heal his wounds. Unfortunately, Zen found out that the power of the godly way remained too weak. It could work for those at the other shore realm and hadn't yet reached the chaotic source realm since their bodies were roughly on the same level as the true gods, though the power they could use was hundreds of times stronger than the one used by the true gods. Reaching the chaotic source realm meant great improvements to a warrior's body. This three-eyed boy was a creature of the dark region and never experienced the chaotic source reinforcement. Zen, however, couldn't resist the strength he released, which meant his body was at least comparable to that of those at the chaotic source realm. Using the internal momentum of the life godly way to heal a warrior at the chaotic source realm was like using ordinary medical herbs on a warrior's critical injuries. It could work, but it would take an extremely long time. 2 hours had passed. 4 hours had passed. 6 hours had passed. Luckily for Zen, his inner world was extremely mature and he felt no signs of exhaustion despite constantly extracting internal momentum for a prolonged period of time. After 7 hours, some small wounds on the three-eyed boy's body began to heal. After 8 hours, black smoke began to rise from the surface of the boy's body as his body and the candlelight began to reject one another. The protection time of the black fruit has expired, Zen said. Nonetheless, he did not panic. He reached out and took another black fruit from the tree and force-fed it to the boy. The black smoke instantly disappeared. 10 hours passed. 12 hours passed. Green raindrops continued to fall down onto the three-eyed boy's body but some black spots appeared. Woo! The giant ape groaned, reminding Zen to eat another one of the white fruits. Zen had already begun to feel the fruit's effects starting to fade but he wanted to know just how long it could last. It seemed that it could last for 14 hours at most. After picking another white fruit from the tree and consuming it, Zen continued to unleash his life godly way. His green life rain now practically soaked the three-eyed boy at this point. 1 day passed, 2 days passed, 3 days passed. Slowly, but surely, the boy's body recovered. Most of his torn flesh had been repaired at this point, though he remained in a comatose state. Meanwhile, the giant ape guarded the hut like a strong guardian. In the Grand Sky Temple, many people stood and stared idly in the distance. They could see the 3 huts, the blue twin stars, but none of them could tell what had possibly occurred. Dorothy's soul of light manifested on a hillside, looking at the distance as she murmured a prayer. I know that you are lucky and will be blessed to overcome any misfortune, so. Before she finished her words, her soul of light dissipated and she retreated from the other shore. Her consciousness had returned to the 2nd floor of Zen's house in the Flow Sword sect, located in the Oneness Mountain of the Oneness Sky Palace, in the Bloom Divine Province of the Source World. She sat straight up in front of Zen and gazed at his handsome face. He looked troubled and Dorothy couldn't help but wonder if he met with some kind of trouble. She stretched her hand and rubbed the wrinkles between his brows. So, you will wake up. Outside the door, Letitia sat all gloomy and worried. She had been sitting there for days, silent and brooding. Margaret wasn't as quiet, knocking on the door constantly and shouting at Dorothy to get out. Dorothy's guards could only glare at Margaret's insolence. Insulting the princess was a grave offense and if it wasn't for Dorothy's orders, they would have taken away this madwoman long ago. Trish and Carrie were busy serving. They had no idea what was happening but they knew Zen was in danger. To say they were worried about Zen was an understatement. Chapter 2886, Suspicion. 1 week later, the three-eyed boy's wounds almost healed. He was still constantly infiltrated with the internal momentum of the life godly way. Since the giant ape had been with Zen and Elvinia over the past several days, it had developed quite a bit of trust in them. Now, it would sometimes leave the three-eyed boy alone with them. Just now, it had left the hut and was picking up some rare herbs from the dark region. It was true that it didn't know much about medicine making, but being a longtime resident of the dark region, it had a fairly good idea of what effect those herbs had. After returning to the hut, the ape gave the herbs to Zen and tried to inform him of their effect. Zen had finally developed a rough understanding of its words and understood what it was trying to say. He processed the juice of the herbs and fed it to the three-eyed boy. 10 days later, either due to those herbs, or the life godly way, the three-eyed boy finally opened his eyes. Shaking his head to remove any grogginess, he got up from the ground and looked around vigilantly. He then remarked in surprise, "I'm fine." Before falling unconscious, he had thought that he was doomed. The ape grunted in response, shaking its huge head with a joyful smile on its face. The three-eyed boy stared at the giant ape and asked, "You brought me back and cured me?" Woo! The honest ape shook its head at once. It was true that it had brought the three-eyed boy back from the mine. Some time ago, the three-eyed boy had broken into the area of the burning crystal mine, but had been surrounded by several black monkeys. This was not the first time he had dealt with them, so he had not taken them seriously at first. However, this time, hundreds of black monkeys had rushed out in full force. The three-eyed boy did not realize that he was outmatched until it was too late. He had only gotten through the siege by spending the last ounce of his strength. Although he had managed to finally rush out of the mine, the black monkeys had chased closely after him, biting his flesh and draining his blood all the way. In the end, he just wasn't able to resist anymore. He had fallen to the ground in the pool of blood. At that critical moment, the giant ape had stretched out its hand and taken him away fast. However, the ape believed that it was Zen who had saved the three-eyed boy's life. It pointed at Zen with its big finger and said, "He saved you." Quote. The three-eyed boy had been living with the giant ape for a long time now, so he could clearly understand every word it said. When he heard that Zen was his savior, his face was full of doubt. It was impossible for Zen to save him due to his physical conditions. Then his eyes swept around, and he saw several large trees inserted around the hut. When he saw the black and white trees all around him, his eyes flashed with surprise. Zen and Elvenia didn't belong to the dark region. All their medicines and efforts would prove to be lethal toxins for him. But with those trees around the hut, things were different. You ate the darkness fruit? The three-eyed boy asked as he stared at Zen. Zen hesitated for a moment before he nodded, yes. The three-eyed boy sneered coldly and continued, you ate the darkness fruit, which means that you had several chances of escaping the dark region over the past several days. Why didn't you go away? Why did you stay to save my life? After eating the darkness fruit, Zen would be able to completely adapt to the environment of the dark region and leave the range of the candlelight. Once they crossed the wooden bridge and left the dark region, even the giant ape would have been unable to do anything to them. But they hadn't escaped. Instead, they had stayed there to save him. In the heart of the three-eyed boy, something was going on. Why would someone sacrifice their own freedom? Answer me, the three-eyed boy roared as the eye on his forehead opened. A ray of green light flashed out and shot towards Zen. The green light could not only penetrate Zen's body, but also his very soul. Puff! As the green light penetrated into his chest, Zen was pulled up into the air. Woo! The huge ape let out a puzzled cry. It had never thought that the three-eyed boy would attack Zen after he woke up. Stop it! How can you do this? He saved your life. Elvenia stood up and cried at the three-eyed boy. Over the past several days, Zen had spent a lot of energy in trying to save the three-eyed boy. Although he had only expedited the internal momentum, he had done so day and night without a break. But even after that, when the three-eyed boy had woken up, he was returning the kindness with ingratitude. The three-eyed boy ignored Elvenia and stared at Zen with his eyes fixed on him. He wanted an answer. He needed an answer. Zen's expression didn't change much. He could easily endure the pain of being pierced. He calmly asked in response, have you always been alone in the dark region? The three-eyed boy didn't know why Zen was asking this question. He replied coldly, so what? You don't have any friends, or family? Zen asked again. Friend, family. These two words were completely new to the three-eyed boy. The only creature he could consider as his friend in the dark region might be this giant ape. When it came to a friend of the same race, or a member of his family, he indeed did not have one. Some people said that the fights in the source world and on the other shore had been long and cruel. But compared to those in the dark region, they had been nothing at all. In the dark region, there had never been any sort of friendship. All the races had been engaged in endless battle ever since they were born. Only a few lucky creatures who had survived countless bloody fights could find a way out and be summoned by the organization. Over the past years, the three-eyed boy had climbed up one step after another. If even a single mistake had found its way into the past 10 million steps he had taken, he would have been dead. After going through such a long and cruel experience, he had lost the ability to trust anyone. To him, Zen and Elvenia should have been ungrateful and angry since they were locked up by him. But even then, at the time of his death, they hadn't run away. Instead, they had saved him. There must be a plot. I wanted to explore the dark region not only to obtain the other shore tokens, but also to satisfy my curiosity about it, Zen explained. In the beginning, we did plan to run away. In fact, we were well prepared for that. But I have a feeling you aren't that bad. You're definitely worth making friends with. I naturally chose to save you. Worth making friends with. The three-eyed boy's face changed when he heard Zen's words. Some deep and small part of his heart was touched by this sentence. If this guy really thinks so, something must be wrong with his brain, the three-eyed boy thought. But somehow, he didn't hate this kind of thinking. His originally stiff and cold face softened a little. The third eye on his forehead blinked softly, and the green light disappeared. Freed of the flash, Zen fell down to the ground with a thump. The three-eyed boy then took some white fruits from the black and white trees and handed them to Zen. As long as you are willing to help me make more candles, I am willing to give you more freedom, he promised. These darkness fruits would enable Zen to walk freely in the dark region. Chapter 2887, Black Monkeys. While the three-eyed boy was asleep, Zen had managed to hide several darkness fruits. He hadn't expected the boy to give them to him on his own prerogative. Aren't you worried about us running away? Zen asked, staring at the boy. Surprisingly, the latter smiled coldly. If you wanted to escape, you should have left by now. I think you're right. Somehow, the resources in the dark region attract you. We can work together. As friends? Zen asked with a friendly smile. The boy glared at him viciously in response before walking down to the hut below. Because of his serious injuries, he couldn't keep all the burning crystals he had robbed from the black monkeys. The hut below was the only place with some reserve. Making the candles remained the most important task at hand, after all. After taking all the burning crystals to the top hut, the three-eyed boy turned and stared at Zen and Elvinia. You said that you wanted the other shore token. The two glanced at each other questioningly. In the time they spent there, the dark region had shown itself to be much more powerful than they could have ever imagined. While they surely yearned for other shore tokens of the dark region, those were things unreachable. Even Elvinia, who was normally proud and arrogant, realized how great of a chance it was. The other shore token she had was also highly precious. Although there was a chance for it to grow, she was willing to change it into something from the dark region. Of course, who wouldn't want it? Zen replied matter-of-factly. Your energy and that of the dark region repel each other, explained the boy. I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to fuse with the other shore token here. Indeed, Zen had ignored the fact. He scratched his head in embarrassment. Over the past 10 days, he had been constantly observing the phenomenon of repulsion. The other shore tokens of the dark region weren't to be integrated with the creatures outside the dark region. Noticing Zen's expression, the boy continued, it is indeed very difficult to fuse the tokens, but it's not entirely impossible. At that, Zen's eyes lit up. Do you have something in mind? There's one way I can think of, but it isn't the right time. I can help you when that time comes. What do you mean by, the right time? Zen asked, confused. Once you finish the candles, responded the boy, revealing a rather stiff smile as he gently patted Zen on the shoulder. Zen could feel his shoulder blade threaten to break into pieces from that gentle pat. The three-eyed boy was undeniably powerful. Once he disappeared into the darkness again, Elvinia chimed in, he didn't leave with any warning this time. It seems he isn't afraid of us running away. The darkness fruit is much more convenient than the candles. He was willing to leave them to me, which means he allowed us to come and go freely, Zen said. Then how about we leave now? She suggested hesitantly. Throwing the burning crystals into the pot, Zen merely smiled at her. Let's get to work. In acceptance, Elvinia said no more. Instead, she concentrated on melting the crystals. Previously, Elvinia was worried about being trapped in that place for the rest of her life. She felt the urgency of heading back to the Phoenix Palace any chance she got. But knowing that she could leave at will provided some comfort. In fact, she thought that perhaps staying within the range of the candlelight wasn't such a bad thing. She was free from the endless fights that plagued the world outside. Taking a darkness fruit, Zen walked into the dark region. After having tested it out before, this time, he didn't feel as nervous going into the dark. Despite what it was, the dark region didn't seem to put Zen down. The energy scattered in the area was no longer repelling Zen after he took a darkness fruit. The dark world shone brightly in Zen's eyes. The road extending to the huts turned out to be a hillside that led to a cliff. Zen couldn't tell how high up it was, but every time the giant ape arrived, it walked below the cliff. For a while, Zen walked along the front of the hillside until he hit a dead end. The path before him had been completely obstructed by shrubs. So the huts are in an isolated location. The boy chose the safest area, Zen muttered. Although he was deeply curious, he figured he shouldn't wander deeper into the dark region. It was his first time exploring on his own, after all. He couldn't leave Elvinia alone in the hut for too long. But just as he turned around to head back, he heard something squeak from nearby. In the dark region, sound fluctuations were also kinds of energy. No one, including Zen, had been able to catch such a sound before. Having immersed himself in the dark region completely, Zen could finally hear it clear as crystal. Squinting into the dark, Zen spotted over a dozen human monkey monsters jumping up and down, rushing straight at him. Such bad luck, Zen thought, frowning at the sight of them. Without a second of hesitation, Zen turned back and rushed to the peak of the hillside. Even the red python didn't dare go within range of the huts, let alone the human monkey monsters. Whoosh! The human monkey monsters were, of course, far more familiar with the terrain than Zen was. They were carefree as they bounced and rolled, rapidly closing the distance between Zen and themselves with great flexibility. Squeak! One of the human monkey monsters started squeaking loudly as it jumped onto Zen's head, trying to stab his head with its hooked tail. But Zen was not as weak as the souls of light the human monkey monsters had attacked before. While he might not have been able to resist a red python's attacks, Zen had no trouble dealing the human monkey monsters behind him. Bowing his head slightly, Zen extended his hands as fast as lightning, twisting the human monkey monster's tail. There was a sudden wave before the monster could only scream and hit another one. Bang! 2 human monkey monsters were knocked straight to the ground as the rest moved in to surround Zen. He climbed up the slope, as the human monkey monsters continued coming after him. He simply pulled one up to throw it at the others. Some fell right into the mountain stream. In almost no time, Zen arrived at the peak of the hillside. About 100 feet away from the huts, he settled his pace and calmed down. Squeak, squeak, squeak. More and more human monkey monsters were gathering under the hillside, their numbers going up into the hundreds. But none of them was climbing the hillside. Instead, they sat in rows as though they were welcoming something with respect. Curious, Zen stayed in his spot to watch. From a distance, the jungle was in a state of turmoil. A road appeared in the middle where many 10-foot-tall monkeys emerged. Even from where he stood, Zen could tell that the tall, strong monkeys were all completely black. Chapter 2888, The Bridge was broken. Black monkeys. Zen raised his eyebrows in slight curiosity. Though the three-eyed boy rarely spoke to them, Zen recalled him mentioning that these black monkeys were the creatures responsible for guarding the burning crystals. Since the three-eyed boy was almost killed by them, Zen figured they were strong. But what were they doing here? A bad feeling began to churn in Zen's stomach. Chatter, chatter, chatter. As these black monkeys showed up one after another, the human monkey monsters' voices grew louder. The atmosphere around them was tense. Just then, this group of monkeys slowly walked towards the hillside. Zen bowed his body on the hillside and motioned backward. Soon enough, he was within range of the candlelight and made his way towards the little hut. Bang! Elvenia was so focused on making the wax that she hadn't noticed Zen's footsteps outside the hut. Having made so many candles, she grew to become more and more skilled. She was even able to discover the best temperature to make wax. The sound rang for another time, which finally got her attention. She looked up from her spot and was surprised to see Zen rushing in like a vanguard. Zen never rushed this way. He was always calm and collected. What's wrong? Elvenia asked lightly. Although the human monkey monsters beneath the hillside were extraordinarily noisy, Elvenia couldn't hear their voices as sounds could not pass through the darkness. Without hesitation, Zen handed a darkness fruit to her. Eat it, he urged. Elvenia stared at him and furrowed her brows in confusion. Why? What happened? We don't have time to talk. We need to leave right now or we'll die. Zen replied hastily. Looking at Zen's serious look, Elvenia didn't hesitate and swallowed the darkness fruit in one gulp. The light fruits and darkness fruits had very special features. The moment Elvenia swallowed the darkness fruit, traces of black clouds spread from her purple soul. In the blink of an eye, the clouds spread throughout her entire soul. Zen grabbed her wrist. Let's go. The two rushed out. But those burning crystals. Elvenia couldn't help but look back at the wax she had to stop working on, but there were other things to worry about now. They had no time to care about those burning crystals. The two sped out of the hut within seconds. But just as they left the hut, the human monkey monsters and black monkeys had already climbed up the hill. Chatter, 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 chatter. Some of those human monkey monsters saw the two run out of the hut, so they immediately let out a scream to warn the others. Whoosh! One of the black monkeys spotted them and instantly rushed towards the two. As Elvenia saw the shadow that was heading for them, she couldn't help but shout at Zen, what in the world is that? Of course, Zen was too preoccupied to process any of her questions. He'd mentally prepared for this exact situation, so the adrenaline in his body erupted without any hesitation. Bang! Under the strong impact, a crater appeared in the open space in front of the hut. Zen, like an arrow from the string, shot towards the wooden bridge, holding Elvenia's hand as tight as he could. With only one step forward, Zen got on the wooden bridge. This move was so unexpected that neither the black monkeys nor the human monkey monsters had time to react. The black monkey that came at them stopped in its tracks. At first, it was confused, its eyes wide and blinking dramatically. But after a few seconds, it let out a sly grin and turned towards its companions. It raised its right thumb up in the air and slowly dragged it horizontally across its neck. The other monkeys grew excited and began to jump and groan rowdily. Chatter, chatter, chatter. They dashed towards the wooden bridge, screaming in excitement. The black monkeys were extremely agile, and climbed the bridge at high speed. But Zen, he was fast, too. Zen pushed his strength as much as he could after he arrived at the wooden bridge. Taking Elvenia, he shot both of them forward 500 feet, 1,000 feet, 3,000 feet on the bridge. In the blink of an eye, they had run away. The black monkeys could see merely black dots moving. Chatter, 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 chatter. The creatures were dismayed by Zen's capabilities. How could he do this? Coming to their senses, they decided to go back to the end of the bridge after discussing with each other. They knew they couldn't catch the two even if they tried. This wooden bridge was made by the three-eyed boy to lure creatures outside of the dark region from the Grand Sky Temple. The wooden bridge was very steady, and it was reinforced with a magic array. It was not easy for the human monkey monsters, pythons and even Zen to break the bridge with their strength, but the black monkeys could. Bang, bang, bang. On one side of the hill, several black monkeys alternated punching the area where the bridge met the hill. After several punches, cracks began to appear across it. As the cracks grew larger, the entire bridge began to creak and shake. Crack. With a loud bang, a section of the wooden bridge fixed on the hill finally broke off, sliding towards the ravine below. Zen had no time to care about what was happening behind him. All he thought about was moving forward and never looking back. Zen, Zen, Elvinia called out from behind. Not now, Zen snapped in a stern voice. Elvinia puckered her lips. If there was one thing she hated the most, it was being told to shut up. She was going to warn him of the bridge, but decided it was best to just keep quiet and let Zen continue on. The bridge had no piers. It was like a line that connected the Grand Sky Temple to the hill. Because the part that connected with the hill collapsed, the entire bridge began to slope downward rapidly. After a few seconds, Zen felt the bridge under his feet begin to quake and tilt. Just as he was wondering, the entire bridge grew steeper and steeper. In a flash, instead of running forward, he was running upward. Caught off guard, Zen and Elvinia fell towards the ravine. What happened? Is the bridge broken? Zen asked as they were falling. Elvinia answered with an impassive face. That's what I was trying to tell you. Zen was struck dumb with the news. As they were falling towards the darkness, he felt a twinge of regret. They had no idea how deep the ravine was, so Zen observed their fall carefully as they descended. After eating the darkness fruits, he and Elvinia had become accustomed to the dark region. They could see the outline of the things beneath them. About half a minute later, Zen used all his might to curl his legs and drag Elvinia into his arms. The next moment, he was hurled directly into the nearby bushes. Boom! It was all right for Zen's body to fall from such a high altitude. But the soul of light was much weaker than the physical body. Zen fell to the ground with Elvinia in his arms, and he made sure to hold her closely to him so that he could take most of the impact. If Zen wasn't careful enough, she might just die. Are you all right? Zen asked with concern, feeling her head and arms for any signs of injury. I'm okay, Elvinia answered in a stammer. She freed herself from Zen's embrace, feeling some sort of warmth deep within her heart. Chapter 2889, Physical Overdraft. Zen looked up and said, "We'd better leave as soon as possible." The black monkeys had broken the bridge and were sure to come crashing down into the ravine. Okay, whatever you say, Elvinia agreed with a nod. She felt Zen tug violently on her hand as he moved forward. As she followed Zen, a strange thought crossed her mind. She realized that she had changed drastically. She held a high status in the source world, causing her peers to feel inferior to her. Even Ephraim and Hayam felt she outshone them. But this time, she had endured a number of setbacks before and after entering the Grand Sky Temple. This had greatly weakened her confidence. Staying in the wooden hut had been bad for her nerves and she had gradually begun to follow Zen as meek as a lamb. Okay, whatever you say. She had never said words like this before. Zen had no idea what Elvinia was thinking about, as all he wanted was to get rid of the black monkeys. As he ran wildly along the ravine, gigantic pincers emerged from the mud on the river and stretched towards him. How dare these crabs attack me? Zen thought, frowning. Zen wasn't taking the crabs seriously even though these were also creatures from the dark region. He quickly grabbed one of the pincers, pulled out the body that had been hidden in the mud, and smashed it repeatedly to the ground. It was a washbasin-sized crab with a strange white pattern on its shell. The crab struggled against Zen's grip, but before it could raise its pincers, Zen stepped on its shell and it shattered into pieces. Plop, plop, dong. Some sudden sounds from the ravine behind him startled him. He turned just in time to see the black monkeys jumping off the cliff, some falling to the ground and some into the river. The black monkeys obviously had strong bodies, brimming with energy as they jumped off the cliff. They lived in the dark region all year round and had an unusually sharp vision and a keen sense of smell. That was why they found him soon. Zen wordlessly continued to run along the ravine. He didn't know where the ravine led to. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A group of black monkeys chased after Zen and Elvinia. These black monkeys were well known in the dark region. They either lurked in the river or on the cliff. The creatures in the shrubs didn't dare to show up, and as they watched Zen running away, they shook their heads and sighed pityingly. They didn't know how Zen had provoked the monkeys. Crunch! The black monkey at the front of the group suddenly jumped up and grabbed a branch of a tree on the edge of the cliff. Swinging off of it, it took off and then pounced on Zen like a bat out of torture. Zen felt the movement above him and looked up, stunned. He took Elvinia up in his arms and shouted, "Don't be afraid." He then gathered his strength and threw Elvinia forward. In the same moment, power erupted from his fists. Many divine megatons of force filled his body. He was weaker than the three-eyed boy, but if he had to face a black monkey alone. Squeak! The monkey smiled scornfully at Zen's action. Fearful that Zen would run away, it had summoned all its strength and applied it to fly forward towards Zen. It had wanted to cut off his path of escape, but it hadn't expected Zen to turn around and confront it instead. Did Zen have a death wish? Bang! Zen collided in midair with the black monkey. One black monkey might not be as strong as the three-eyed boy, but it wasn't to be underestimated. The impact was such that Zen felt his bones rattle within his body, as if they had been displaced. Zen had rarely encountered such a strong opponent even in the source world. But it looked like this kind of opponent was common in the dark region. Phew! Under the impact, the body of the black monkey bounced onto the cliff. Zen ran forward and caught Elvinia, who seemed to be falling in slow motion. Once he had gathered her in his arms, he quickly made an escape. Quack, quack, the black monkey pushed itself up off the tree, gritting its teeth. It took a couple of breaths before launching off the cliff and chasing after Zen again. The black monkeys chased Zen across dozens of miles along the ravine. It looked like they weren't about to let Zen go. Zen was beginning to worry as he fled. On one hand, he was afraid of choosing the wrong direction. The black monkeys were social creatures. If he were to break into their nests along the ravine, even by mistake, he would be digging his own grave. But his luck had always been good and he didn't need to worry about it for the time being. On the other hand, he was worried about his physical strength. As he fled, he was not only consuming the strength of his physical body, but also the other shore power of the strength god totem. If the power of the other shore token were to be completely consumed, it would be replenished, but at an annoyingly slow pace. Zen needed the divine crystals to replenish the other shore power at a faster rate. It would be easy for him to replenish the divine crystals if he could leave the other shore. But he couldn't do that after entering the Grand Sky Temple. He had always used the other shore power over the past few days. And since he was now running at full speed, the other shore power was being consumed at a faster rate. Once the other shore power of the strength god totem was exhausted, he would no longer be able to fight the black monkeys. After more than 10 miles, the ravine, which was originally over 1,000 feet wide, began to narrow with each mile they crossed. When the ravine was no longer than 10 feet wide, Zen and Elvinia looked at each other, worried. It felt like the mountain was moving in on them. And then, something weird happened. The black monkeys that had been chasing after Zen and Elvinia stopped abruptly. They didn't dare to enter the narrow ravine. They stood at the border, chattering and shouting. "Zen, they aren't coming in," said Elvinia. "That's good, isn't it?" Zen said. "What are they afraid of?" "I'm scared something bad is about to happen," Elvinia said worriedly. "I know," Zen said, shrugging and gently lowering Elvinia to the ground. "You knew that and still came running here. You are going to." Elvinia was reproaching Zen, but suddenly his body began to convulse before he collapsed to the ground. Chapter 2890, Dangerous Ravine. Zen had been consuming the other shore power all the way. At this point, his power was almost completely exhausted. Even in the last part of his journey, Zen continuously exploited the strength god totem, as well as the other shore power of the Eye of Will. After finally exhausting both, he began exploiting the power of his own physical body. In the end, he ended up exhausting his physical strength. His body was like an empty bottle when he fell to the ground. Before she was able to finish her words, Elvinia was startled by Zen's fall. "Zen, what's wrong?" she asked, her anxiety rising. Rarely, perhaps even never, had Zen seen himself in such a weak situation. While his strength was waning, his mind was still as sharp as always. "I'm fine, just exhausted." Exhausted? Elvinia certainly wasn't expecting that. How can this be? In theory, after reaching the true god realm, a warrior would never deplete their strength. When the other shore power was used up, the godly way's internal momentum could be used. Once this was used up, life vitality could take its place. But what happened once life vitality was used up as well? One's inner world would probably collapse. Zen's situation was unique. After the other shore power of both his other shore tokens was exhausted, they were now absorbing Zen's own energy. Two enormous whirlpools stood by the exit of his inner world, preventing Zen from utilizing the internal momentum and power of chaotic energy. At this point, Zen found it difficult to even open his mouth. He gave up explaining things further to Elvenia. The black monkeys that were hiding in the distance saw Zen fall clearly with their own eyes. It was a dangerous area in the depths of the narrow ravine. Even the black monkeys didn't dare to rush in mindlessly. But Zen was right on the verge of it. Originally, the monkeys were already planning to give up. But now that Zen was lying on the ground, barely able to move, they knew they had to take their chance. Only a few steps into the ravine, they could catch him. They just had to make sure not to wake up the big creature inside. Crunch, creak. After a short discussion, 3 of the black monkeys tiptoed their way inside. Afraid of disturbing the creature staying deep in the ravine, they moved as stealthily as they could. "Don't worry, I'll be fine after resting for a bit," Zen reassured her. The power of his other shore tokens was restoring very slowly, but it wouldn't take long for his body to recover. Then he would have just enough strength to move and walk on his own. "I want to let you rest, but I don't think the black monkeys will be nice enough to wait," Elvenia said bitterly, glancing back at the 3 monkeys who weren't too far away. Zen was stunned. He had no energy to check the situation himself. "Did they enter the ravine? Didn't you say they wouldn't dare step inside?" Elvenia shook her head bitterly. "We might not be deep enough inside. There are 3 of them walking to us. We're in trouble," Zen said with a bitter smile. He was at a loss for what to do. Elvenia's eyes flashed with golden light. A strong desire to survive grew within her heart. In all the time she'd been in the dark region, she had relied on Zen for protection. Now, it was time to rely on herself. Nope. Suddenly, she grabbed Zen's hand and let her soul energy burst before pulling him toward the narrow stream. In the source world, Zen's body would have been nothing to her. But on the other shore, it was quite heavy for her soul of light. She could only depend on her soul power to drag Zen's body along. Wrestle, wrestle, wrestle. Zen's body was dragged on the ground. From where he lay, he could see Elvenia's movements. Though he couldn't see her expression, he could tell she was exerting a great amount of effort to keep on dragging him. "Just leave me here. You can go ahead on your own. The black monkeys wouldn't dare chase you inside," Zen said. Gritting her teeth, she continued. "They didn't dare come in here because of the danger awaiting them deep in the ravine. If you were captured, I would die alone here. But I can't protect you anymore," Zen said helplessly. Without another word, Elvenia kept dragging Zen into the depths of the ravine. The 3 monkeys didn't expect her to go so far in. They were creeping into the ravine quietly and steadily, but at that pace, they wouldn't catch up to her. Squeak, squeak, squeak. After stopping for a moment of discussion, they were ready to risk everything. If they ran as fast as they could catch up to Zen in mere seconds. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Suddenly, the monkeys accelerated, reaching for Zen. Their change in pace had Elvenia rattled. She could barely resist the weaker human monkey monsters with her soul of light, let alone these 10-foot-tall black monkeys. But at this moment, Elvenia felt no urge to escape. Her cold, hard eyes widened, and golden divine flames began emerging on the surface of her body, turning into golden whips that lashed at the black monkeys. This soul attack was considered quite a powerful means in stage 13 of the other shore. Only the best of superpowers could withstand it. But in these black monkeys' eyes, such an attack was nothing. Even if they were defenseless, Elvenia couldn't hurt them at all. But right before her golden whips slashed them, they began screaming, as though the whips somehow scared them. Their faces grew full of fear before they turned back and ran away. What's going on? She wasn't expecting them to run away so quickly. Did the divine flame of the sun crow race somehow repel them? But before she could figure it out, black, brown, and gray tentacles emerged from behind her, one after another. In an instant, there were hundreds of them, covering up almost the entire space in the ravine. Splash! The creeping tentacles looked like running black water as they went around Elvenia and rushed toward the black monkeys. While they were running at great speed, the tentacles were faster. Cluck, squeak, quack. Soon, they were entangled in the tentacles and dragged into the depths of the ravine, leaving behind only sharp roars that echoed in the space. When it went quiet, Elvenia was still standing in her spot, petrified. The touch of the tentacles skimming over her soul surface made her soul of light tremble in fear. But why did they leave her and Zen behind? Chapter 2891, The Light. A cool breeze swept over the ravine, brushing Elvinia's cheeks. She shivered violently. Leaning against Zen, her soul of light trembled slightly as she gazed into the depths of the ravine. Zen, what were those just now? They must have been the tentacles of some monster, Zen replied. Then, why didn't they take us away? She asked weakly. Her voice shook as she spoke. Zen felt somewhat bad for her. Even when she was in danger on the wooden bridge, Elvinia never showed emotion. Now, it seemed she was truly scared, like a small child trembling beside him. I don't know, Zen said carefully. Maybe they didn't like us. Zen had stared danger in the face countless times before, so he was able to stay calm despite the circumstances. Elvinia, on the other hand, was obviously overwhelmed. Let's get out of here, pleaded Elvinia. I can't stay here any longer. What about the black monkeys outside? Are they gone already? Zen asked. Elvinia turned to look, and then shook her head in disappointment. No, they're still there. We can't leave then. Zen struggled to get on his feet. After having rested for a bit, he felt a little stronger. At the very least, he could stand up. Have you recovered already? Elvinia asked in surprise. Having seen Zen fall, she had been at a loss. Now that Zen was trying to get up, she felt a glimmer of hope. While Elvinia might have come off as cold and independent, secretly, she was the opposite. She had just chosen to never show such weakness back in the Oneness Sky Palace. Can you help me up? Zen asked helplessly. Elvinia hurried to help him up. Zen eyed the ravine. Then, he staggered to the mountainside and leaned against it. The situation wasn't as bad as it could have been. It was good news that whatever was lurking in the depths of the ravine wasn't attacking them. Their most pressing problem was those black monkeys, persistently waiting for them. Around 8 hours later, Zen noticed the surrounding area gradually turning darker. The effect of the darkness fruit is weakening, he muttered under his breath. He had tested the darkness fruit before. While the time limit of each fruit varied, the longest he'd seen was 14 hours at most. Once he noticed the effect was wearing off, he asked Elvinia to take out 2 fruits, one for each of them. As soon as they ingested it, gradually, the dark world lit up. How many darkness fruits do we have left? Zen asked. Elvinia's space ring flashed. After counting, she answered, 14. 14, Zen frowned. If they split the fruits between themselves, each would have 7. That meant they would last 98 hours at most, roughly 4 days. If they couldn't find the black and white tree within 4 days, they would be completely swallowed by the darkness. Zen shook his head at the thought. He didn't want to imagine what'd happen if it came to that point. Turning to look at the black monkeys, he gritted his teeth. The monkeys were still waiting for them. They needed to find a way to get out. Zen slowly stood up. Let's go in to have a look. Go in. Elvinia's eyes widened in shock. She couldn't help but shudder at the thought of those cold tentacles coiling around her frail body. We will die if we stay here, Zen said gravely. Elvinia opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. What Zen said made sense. She refused to die in the dark region. Perhaps that monster isn't that terrifying, she quietly consoled herself. Fortunately, Zen's physical strength had been restored by that time. Exchanging one last glance, Zen nodded at Elvinia. Together, they steadily walked towards the depths of the ravine. The deeper they got, the narrower the ravine became. When they had started, it was around 10 feet wide. After a couple of minutes of walking, the gap was only around 2 feet wide. Zen and Elvinia could only move sideways to fit through it. After what seemed like an eternity of inching through that narrow gap, they suddenly saw light streaming in from the distance. The two of them looked towards the light with amazement written all over their faces. As soon as their eyes adjusted to the light, they noticed paintings scrawled on the walls of the ravine. Upon studying them closely, Zen gasped. The paintings were huge Sanskrit words. As his eyes followed the trail of Sanskrit words, he realized they terminated in a triangular cave on the mountain wall. Black tentacles extended from the cave, lazily making their way to the ground. Those tentacles. Elvinia was taken aback. Clatter, clatter, clatter. At the sound of Elvinia's voice, the tentacles suddenly perked up. They quickly rushed towards the two, climbing the walls of the mountain with incredible speed. Zen clamped his hand over Elvinia's mouth. The two lay prone on the ground. Slowly, the black tentacles scanned the walls, prodding each crevice. Elvinia whimpered as they got close, but Zen kept his hand firmly on her mouth. Confused, the tentacles retreated. Elvinia shuddered. If she had entered the other shore with her physical body, she knew she'd probably faint if she felt the cool, slimy touch of those black tentacles. However, something dawned on her. Her eyes flashed excitedly as she gestured at Zen, but he shook his head, indicating she needed to stay quiet. He knew what she was trying to say, he had realized it, too. The tentacles couldn't see them. Both the black monkeys and the tentacles were creatures from the dark region. Thus, the tentacles should be able to find the black monkeys. Zen and Elvinia, on the other hand, were not from the dark region, their forms were different from those of the creatures in the dark region. The two of them could adapt to the environment of the dark region only by absorbing the energy of the darkness fruits. The tentacles must have sensed something, but couldn't confirm what it was. Zen patted Elvinia's shoulder, encouraging her to keep moving forward. As long as they didn't make a sound, they should be safe. After inching a bit further along the ravine, Zen noticed there were more triangular caves. It seemed, every 500 to 600 feet, there was a triangular cave. From each cave, countless black tentacles hung lazily. Other than the tentacles, it didn't look as though anything else lurked here. As Zen carefully observed the walls, Elvinia suddenly pointed towards the front. Turning to where she was pointing, he saw there was a round valley on the other side. There were also huge Sanskrit words engraved on the wall of the valley. The wall was covered with densely packed triangular caves as well, and again, huge tentacles hung from the cave entrances. However, Zen's gaze was fixed on the center of the valley, where the darkness had disappeared. A gentle ray of light pierced through the darkness like a sharp blade. The ring of light covered a range of no more than 10 feet. At the center of the ring was a tombstone, basking in the ray of light. Although Zen didn't know where the light was coming from and why it appeared in the dark region, he was sure that the space it illuminated didn't belong to the dark region. Chapter 2892, Shelter. The past few days, Zen and Elvinia had been living under the candlelight. Compared to the absolute darkness of the dark region, the candlelight seemed extremely bright, but still, it was nothing compared to actual sunlight outside the dark region. When they started taking the darkness fruits, they adapted to the darkness, being able to see their surroundings. They had grown accustomed to living in the darkness, so once they saw the dazzling bright light streaming into the dark region, they were stunned. Elvinia's eyes widened. Leaning on Zen's shoulder, she whispered, "That place covered by the light, it doesn't belong to the dark region, right? Anyone who was in the dark region and the temples would be unable to leave the other shore. But in other places, they'd be able to leave the other shore and return to their bodies normally." Elvinia had grown tired of the dark region, having been trapped here for a long time. She wanted to leave as soon as possible. But when she considered leaving, she sighed in resignation. According to the rules of the other shore, they could only enter it from the place they left last time. So, if she tried leaving now, she would only return here the next time she entered the other shore. The tentacles that hung from the mouths of the triangular caves were extremely sensitive. They had no eyes, but they could easily sense their prey by following their energy. While Zen and Elvinia had energy within them, because they weren't creatures born in the dark region, the tentacles couldn't seem to sense them. But as Elvinia whispered, the tentacles suddenly tensed. Whoosh! Thousands of tentacles whirled into action, filling the air around the valley with a black indiscernible mass. It was as though a dark windstorm formed. Seeing this, Elvinia immediately shut up. Zen, on the other hand, remained calm. As long as he was beginning to comprehend how the creatures of the dark worked, they wouldn't be as scary. Gently and quietly, he pulled Elvinia to the side. The black whirlwind shot towards the spot where Elvinia had been standing only a moment later. After finding nothing there, the black tentacles retreated to their respective triangular caves. "Isn't this fun?" Zen said to Elvinia with a sly smile. Elvinia, however, just shuddered. The mere sight of those menacing tentacles made her uncomfortable, she didn't dare provoke them further. However, as Zen spoke, the tentacles rushed out from the caves once more. You. Elvinia looked to Zen helplessly, desperate to tell him to shut up. But she didn't dare to make a sound. With a nervous gulp, she followed Zen as he moved to the side to dodge the tentacles. The tentacles circled around the valley again, seemingly confused that they couldn't catch their prey, then resignedly returned to their caves. As this was happening, Zen carefully observed the process. Since these tentacles lurked here, there shouldn't be any other dark region creatures in the valley. They should be able to reach the column of light safely. But Zen hesitated. There might be traps within the light column. Cautiously, Zen approached the column of light. The closer he got, the more he could see what was within the light. A lone bronze tombstone lay in the center of the light. 7 stars had been engraved on its surface. Underneath the stars was a row of strange words, They weren't Sanskrit words, so they must have been in a language belonging to a special civilization. Behind the tombstone was a small tomb, only around 5 or 6 feet wide. Some green weeds and petite flowers grew on top of the tomb. Just as Zen and Elvinia were closing in on the column of light and they were about 60 or 70 feet away from the tomb, suddenly a circle of purple light glowed from the ground. Buzz. After the circle of light appeared, sharp sounds pierced the air, like an alarm blaring throughout the whole valley. Cracks suddenly appeared under the triangular caves, causing the caves to collapse. On one side of the valley, small, round portals appeared. Monsters the size of a young child emerged from the portals, heading straight for Zen and Elvinia. These monsters were bipedal. From the neck upwards, they had the face of a pig. As they ran towards the two, they waved black spears in the air. Who dares to trespass into our holy tomb? Catch them. Don't let them approach the holy tomb. Zen and Elvinia were momentarily too stunned to react. After all, these pig-faced monsters spoke in the human tongue. Before they could respond, the tentacles also began to move. While they originally weren't able to detect the existence of Elvinia and Zen, with the appearance of these pig-faced monsters, the situation suddenly changed drastically. It seemed they had some sort of a symbiotic relationship. The pig-faced monsters served as eyes to the unseeing tentacles. The tentacles shot into the air once more. Only this time, they knew where their prey lay. Dang, Zen cried. He didn't expect any other creatures lay hidden in the walls of the valley. His eyes darted around as he tried to figure out the best plan of action. It was impossible for them to leave the valley in a short time. Then, his eyes landed on the copper tombstone. He gritted his teeth. There was no other way. Head for the light column, Zen told Elvinia. Seeing the tentacles rush out again, Elvinia was pretty annoyed. But her experience in the past few days made her know it was useless to complain. Charge! Elvinia cried as she ran towards the light. Zen staggered from behind her. He only had some of his physical strength restored and could barely keep up with her. Like a black whirlwind, thousands of tentacles shot towards them. Aside from the tentacles, the pig-faced monsters also moved fast. Some of them threw their spears at the two. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Black spears came at them, like a swarm of locusts. Zen and Elvinia were very close to the holy tomb, and it would only take them a few seconds to reach it. They helplessly continued to run as fast as they could towards the tomb. Another volley of spears came flying at them. Just as the spears and the tentacles were about to reach them, Zen mustered all his remaining strength to pounce forward. As he leapt, he pushed Elvinia into the column of light as well. He rolled in behind her, looking desperate to take shelter from the attacks. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Ear-piercing shrieks suddenly burst from behind Zen as he landed within the column of light. The tentacles whirled into the column of light like crazy. As they were creatures of the dark region, they'd die as soon as they came into contact with the light. But still, they continued to charge after Zen. Once they touched the light, they became nothing but ash. The air was filled with the pungent scent of thousands of scorched pigs. Besides the tentacles, the black spears shot by the pig-faced monsters also disintegrated once they came into contact with the light. Elvinia sat inside the light column, her body trembling. She wasn't used to a life of narrowly escaping death. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Some tentacles were stubborn and still attempted to reach for Zen, charging fearlessly into the column of light. Some thick tentacles weren't burned completely after they rushed into the light column. They fell on the ground and on Zen's body, still jumping like mad. They quickly turned into a hapless, seared mess. The smell of char filled Zen's nostrils. The pig-faced monsters stood right before the light. They roared, cursed, and even stabbed their black spears into the light column in fury. Come out. Why are you hiding in there? You cowards! I will make you die a graveless death. However, Zen just heaved a sigh of relief. He knew they only cursed at him because there was nothing more they could do. Chapter 2893, Return. The tentacles lashed around wildly for quite a long time before finally settling. Light could swallow up all the creatures of the dark region. Even though the tentacles could regenerate, they still couldn't afford to lose that much energy. The creatures of the dark region. They're more fragile than I thought, Zen remarked. The fruits of the black and white tree proved extremely beneficial. After eating the darkness fruits, both he and Elvinia were granted the ability of adapting to the dark region's environment. On the other hand, if dark region creatures ate the light fruits, then they would be able to adapt to the outside world. However, the three-eyed boy and the huge ape could only adapt to the candlelight and were unable to leave. If the creatures of the dark region weren't afraid of light, then they would have ruled the other shore, Elvinia said. Zen could only nod in agreement. I can't refute that. The creatures of the other shore were much stronger than the souls of light, but the creatures here in the dark region were far stronger than those on the other shore. If the dark region's inhabitants had the ability to walk freely in the light, then they would be an unstoppable force. I wonder where the light is coming from, Zen muttered to himself as he looked directly up to the sky. Darkness was everywhere save for that one strange hole above them where light filtered through, bathing them with illuminated safety. He would have never believed such a place existed if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes. I just want to know if we can get out of here, Elvinia told him. She too couldn't help but gaze at that strange light that shone above them. With a weary sigh, Elvinia then began to recite the illusion-breaking rune. Buzz. As soon as the illusion-breaking rune broke through the illusions, Elvinia's soul of light began to dissipate. She flashed Zen a cold smile, no longer sad and weary, just before fully fading in the wind. She really left, Zen remarked. Standing there alone, he felt the weak power of his other shore tokens in his body. He figured that perhaps it would be best if he also left the other shore and replenished his power. However, as soon as he made that decision, the pig-faced monsters around the light column stepped aside. One of them, a dark blue one, walked towards Zen and stopped just by the edge of the light column. This one raised its hand and silence immediately fell amongst its peers. Human friend from outside the dark region, the pig-faced monster greeted in a very polite tone. Zen previously had no interest in these monsters. However, this change of attitude was very much welcome. He and Elvinia had been safe within the light column, but it was only a temporary sanctuary. Now that Elvinia had gone back to the Oneness Sky Palace, Zen figured that he now had to find a way out for both of them on his own. He smiled at the pig-faced monster. What can I do for you? The pig-faced monster huffed as it looked at Zen. Can you come out of the holy tomb? It asked. Zen shook his head. No, he wasn't stupid. Walking out of the light column would mean instant death. This is our holy tomb, a sacred place to our kind. We hold it in the highest reverence. Your presence here offends us, the pig-faced monster insisted. The young man couldn't help but roll his eyes. He and Elvinia didn't mean to intrude into anyone's sacred place. They were just seeking a safe place from those black monkeys. Zen could only look at the pig-faced monster with a wry smile. What do you want me to do then? Can you come out of the holy tomb? The pig-faced monster repeated. Zen pinched the bridge of his nose in frustration. Despite having the ability to speak the human language, it didn't seem as if the pig-faced monster was very intelligent. Zen heaved a sigh, looking at the strange monsters that were trying to kick him out of their holy tomb. Bye. That was the last thing he said before he began to recite the illusion-breaking rune. As he murmured the words, his body started to blur before finally disappearing. As soon as he disappeared, the pig monsters began to curse loudly. Vulgar atrocities spilled from their lips, especially the leaders. In the Phoenix Palace, there was a huge magic array. This array was quite special looking as it emitted a faint golden glow. A body sat in the middle. Soon, the light emanating from it grew more intense and golden flames began to lick at the array, releasing a terrifying burst of energy. This energy had come from Flamen, who was currently controlling the magic array. 3 old men stood behind her. They were famous powerhouses of the Phoenix Palace and recognized as great masters of the Oneness Sky Palace. One of the 3 old men stepped forward, a helpless look evident on his face. Lady Flamen, we've tried it 3 times already. Given Princess Elvinia's location, it would be hard to pull her out. The only way we'd be able to do so is if she happens to walk by a place where the energy is weak. In the source world, there were some methods of forcing people out of the other shore. Although the soul-binding thread could trap people on the other shore, they could be forcefully pulled out. However, the power of the Grand Sky Temple in the dark region was so great that even if Flamen set up an array, she still failed to wake Elvinia up. Contribute your soul power, she ordered, the determination on her face never fading. She knew Elvinia was fine, but the reactions Elvinia had recently worried her. As soon as she said this, Elvinia's body, which had been sitting in the middle of the array, slightly trembled. Fear crossed her sleeping features and she was shaking as if she was afraid of something. Flamen was in distress. She didn't know what her daughter was currently going through for her to have reacted this way. It's not a problem to contribute our soul power. What we're worried about is Princess Elvinia. Our combined soul power might be too strong and she might not be able to withstand it. Another old man said with a pleading voice. If they did as Flamen said, then they might accidentally tear Elvinia's soul apart. We won't know unless we try. She's so weak, she might die on the other shore at any moment. Flamen raged. As soon as the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace returned, they immediately headed to Flamen and gave her a full report of the situation. She was well aware of the dangers they had faced, and there was no way she was letting her daughter stay one more minute in that place. Under Flamen's strict orders, the three old men had no choice but to obey. The magic array was reactivated and Flamen released the divine flames of the Sun Crow race to control it. However, at that exact moment, Elvinia suddenly opened her eyes. "Mother," she exclaimed in surprise, seeing Flamen and the three old men before her. All concentration Flamen had flew right out of the window the moment she heard her daughter's voice. With a trembling lip, she ran towards the magic array and swooped down to take Elvinia in her arms. "I'm sorry, Mother," Elvinia murmured. This apology sparked something in Flamen's heart. The mother and daughter pair did not really get along well with each other. Elvinia always showed indifference and sometimes even hostility to her mother. Flamen never expected her to apologize like this after returning from the Dark Region. Chapter 2894, Wake Up. "Never mind, I'm just glad you're okay," said Flamen softly, cradling her daughter in her arms. What was important was her daughter had finally come back safely. Elvinia's eyelashes fluttered as she tried to keep her eyes open. Forcing a smile, she murmured, "It's not that simple." "What do you mean?" Not understanding what Elvinia meant, Flamen anxiously held Elvinia's hands and looked her up and down carefully. Afraid that her daughter's soul had been hurt, she breathed a sigh of relief when she found that Elvinia was perfectly fine. "I'm still in the Dark Region," Elvinia replied. When the three old men heard her words, they exchanged worried glances. One of them cut in, "If you are still in the Dark Region, how did you leave?" There were special ways to enter the Dark Region. They were rarely ever used, but some masters in the Oneness Sky Palace, like Flamen, knew about them. Flamen's eyes widened in shock. She couldn't imagine how her daughter managed to escape from the other shore if she was in the Dark Region. Elvinia glanced apprehensively at the three old men. "Uncles, would you mind leaving me and my mother alone?" Even though the three men were from Phoenix Palace, there were some things Elvinia only wanted to disclose to her mother. "Princess Elvinia, you have just returned from the other shore. Please rest well," one of them said meekly. "If you have any problem, you can approach me anytime," another one added. The third uncle nodded wordlessly. Once the three old men left, only Elvinia and Flamen were left in the huge palace. Then, Elvinia turned to her mother seriously and explained what happened in the Dark Region. Flamen had already heard of what happened in the Grand Sky Temple in the wooden hut. The disciples of the Phoenix Palace had already reported to her in detail. But she knew nothing about what happened after Dorothy, Hyam and the others left. "Has that corporeal body been protecting you the whole time you were in the Dark Region?" Flamen asked. Zen's face flashed in Elvinia's mind, albeit a bit vaguely. After all, she had only physically met Zen twice in the Oneness Sky Palace, even though they had spent a long time on the other shore together. Elvinia nodded. "Mother, do you know who the corporeal body is?" Flamen shook her head. Only a few people in the Oneness Sky Palace knew Zen could enter the other shore with his corporeal body. Who is he? Is he a disciple of the Oneness Sky Palace? After all, the mysterious man had helped the Oneness Sky Palace so often. It was very likely he was a disciple from there. But Flamen couldn't figure out who he was exactly. After a brief pause, Elvinia whispered, "It's Zen Luo." A flash of excitement lit up Flamen's beautiful eyes. Although she had suspected this, she still felt a tinge of shock. The first time she had encountered Zen, he had broken into the Phoenix Palace, which was no ordinary feat. He had even managed to suppress Elvinia. Moreover, his other shore token was of the strengthening type, which was nothing special. While there were many amazing disciples in the Oneness Sky Palace, in the eyes of Flamen, no one was her daughter's match, except Zen. Her happy expression quickly shifted to one of worry. "Since you're back, has Zen also returned?" "He should have," Elvinia answered. "Mother, listen to me." She then went on to tell Flamen about what they had seen in the Dark Region. When she mentioned the light column, Flamen raised her eyebrows curiously. Something seemed to cross her mind, but she didn't say it aloud. "Only after we entered the light column were we able to leave the other shore. If we return, we will still be trapped in there," Elvinia said helplessly. It was similar to being trapped in the whirlpool in the Sea of Truth. If the souls of light were trapped somewhere on the other shore, it would be difficult to improve their cultivation in the future. Elvinia also knew that asking for her mother's help was probably futile. It would be very difficult for souls of light in upper stages to enter lower stages. Even if they did manage to enter, they would still be in great danger in the Dark Region. After a while, Flamen said cautiously, "I'm going to see Zen." I'll come with you, Elvinia immediately answered. Flamen raised an eyebrow at her daughter in surprise. The Elvinia she knew wouldn't have been so amicable. Of course, Elvinia understood what was going on in her mother's mind. Her usual emotionless face turned bright red with embarrassment. I just want to discuss with him how we will get out of this troublesome situation. That's what I thought, but why are you blushing? Flamen said with a knowing smile. Elvinia felt even more embarrassed. Pursing her lips, she tried to resume her usual cold expression. Meanwhile, Letitia was busy thinking about the other shore. She had never been there before, so it was hard for her to imagine just how dangerous it was. Every time Dorothy returned, she would ask about the situation there. Dorothy understood her worries and had patiently answered her every time. The events that took place in the Grand Sky Temple had made an impact on the ear mice. They had no intention of opening the temple again in the near future, so these days, the 13 stages on the other shore were quite peaceful. However, when Letitia asked Dorothy for news this time around, Dorothy shook her head in worry. The candlelight is out, was the only thing she said. Standing at the entrance to the Grand Sky Temple, she could see the 3 wooden huts and a band of light leading to the huts. The band of light was the wooden bridge. 2 hours ago, Dorothy stood at that very same spot to investigate. At the time, the band of light and the huts were nowhere to be seen. That could only mean one thing: the candlelight went out. Without the candlelight, both the souls of light and the corporeal bodies would be swallowed up by darkness. One could only imagine the consequences. Dorothy hurriedly withdrew from the other shore and rushed to find Letitia. The two of them both bolted to the second floor to check up on Zen. To their relief, they found that he was still sitting there, breathing evenly. Although they did not know what had happened in the dark region, it was still good news that Zen was still alive. This time, when Dorothy arrived, Margaret didn't taunt her. Zen had been trapped for so long. She was getting more and more anxious. These days, she had been sitting in silence at the end of the corridor on the second floor, looking into the room from time to time, hoping that Zen would wake up. I didn't expect the cultivation on the other shore would be so dangerous, Letitia said with a sigh. In her mind, cultivation methods and theurgies might make one mad, but compared to the other shore, these were nothing. Strictly speaking, entering the other shore isn't a kind of cultivation. It's simply an adventure, Dorothy explained. Countless talents have died on the other shore since ancient times. Letitia shuddered at the word, die. With an indignant huff, she said, my husband has good luck. I believe he will return safely. Suddenly, a deep voice interrupted them. Oh, how are you so confident in your husband? The women turned to look. To their surprise and delight, Zen smiled at them from where he sat. Chapter 2895, Promise. Ever since Dorothy had explained Zen's predicament, Letitia and Margaret had been sick with worry. Sometimes, Letitia found herself envying Laquisha, Nellie and Lavender, since they were blissfully ignorant, cultivating within the Phoenix Palace walls. At times, she even regretted leaving Zen's inner world. If she had stayed in the fairy palace, she wouldn't have had any clue as to what was happening in the outside. But, all of a sudden, these worries disappeared the second she heard her lover's voice. Whoosh! From the end of the corridor, Margaret had transformed into a purple shadow that flew towards Zen. Letitia also threw herself into Zen's arms. Plop! Zen, who had been physically exhausted when he rushed into the light column, felt little to no strength now. So when the two women pounced on him, Zen fell backwards under their weight. Surprised that he was so weak, Letitia hurriedly asked, Darling, is there something wrong with you? I'm fine, Zen answered with a smile. He fondly stroked Letitia's hair. Are you hungry? Do you have no strength left? Margaret asked with concern, laying her hand gently on Zen's arm. You're half right, Zen replied with a chuckle. So. The two women lovingly gushed at Zen, and he patiently replied to all their queries with a serene expression on his face. Dorothy sat opposite to Zen, but she felt like an outsider. While Zen was still trapped on the other shore, she had often visited them. Here, she learned that Zen had several lovers, and that there were even 3 more cultivating in the Phoenix Palace. Although Dorothy maintained her composure, internally, she cursed at Zen. She never expected Zen was like this. However, she too was relieved that Zen had finally woken up. She smiled slightly. She knew nothing could trap Zen Luo, not even the dark region. After he answered all their questions, Zen gently flicked his hand. His space ring appeared, and he took a considerable amount of divine crystals. Then, he crushed them and threw them into his cinnabar field. These divine crystals released their energy and nourished Zen's inner world. Buzz! Zen's two other shore tokens absorbed these divine crystals, energy greedily, and then transformed the energy into the other shore power. It didn't take Zen long to crush more than 100,000 divine crystals into his cinnabar field. After most of his other shore power was restored, Zen finally relaxed. Turning to Dorothy, he smiled. So, you successfully retreated from the Grand Sky Temple. In the dark region, Zen didn't know what was going on outside. He had been worried that Dorothy would be in danger when they had parted ways. Yes, how about Elvinia? Is she all right? Dorothy asked. Both Zen and Elvinia had been asked to stay in the dark region by the three-eyed boy. She clenched her fists. Dorothy had always felt that she should have been the one by Zen's side. We are still trapped in that place, Zen answered in a frustrated tone. You and Elvinia are still trapped? Then how were you able to leave? Dorothy asked in surprise. Since there were no outsiders present, Zen decided it was safe to tell them everything. Briefly, he explained to them what had happened to him and Elvinia in the dark region. The more Zen talked, the more worried Dorothy became. What should we do? Will you be trapped there forever? There is always a solution, Zen consoled her. At least now, I can come back to replenish my strength. If Zen used all his other shore power, he could fight a black monkey. However, once that was used up, he would be left defenseless against all the other creatures there. It's a pity that I don't have any candles, Dorothy murmured, biting her lips. If she had candles, she would have entered the dark region again to attempt to rescue Zen and Elvinia. Seeing how Dorothy cared about him so much, Zen was moved. Don't worry, he said and smiled. I'll definitely find a way out. Just as Zen was speaking, Trish suddenly burst into the room. Tia, there are two guests. Her eyes widened when she saw Zen. Mr. Luo, you are awake. During Zen's stay on the other shore, Trish had reported everything happening in the house to Letitia. Hence, she was surprised to see Zen awake. Yes, Zen nodded. Who are the guests? Before Trish could reply, two elegant figures emerged from behind her. One wore a blue robe, the other, a green dress. It was Elvinia in her physical form and her mother, Flamen. At the sight of Flamen, Zen instantly knew the purpose of their visit. Since Elvinia was able to find out his true identity, she had probably told her mother by now. Zen stood up and bowed to Flamen. I didn't know that you were here, Lady Flamen, so I didn't come to greet you. My apologies. Flamen smiled slightly, her eyes twinkling charmingly. It's easy for me to forgive you. After all, you must protect my daughter and make sure she makes it out of the dark region unharmed. Mother, Elvinia whined. Dorothy frowned. Elvinia had entered the dark region voluntarily, so Zen had nothing to do with it. But Flamen seemed to be putting the blame on him. If I can safely leave that place, I will definitely protect Princess Elvinia, Zen replied respectfully. To his surprise, though, Flamen was dissatisfied with his polite answer. Taking a step forward, she looked at him fiercely. Elvinia is my only daughter. I won't allow anything bad to happen to her. Her eyes narrowed. Promise me, Zen. Zen frowned slightly, and even Letitia and Margaret watched uneasily. As a formidable woman, Flamen keenly sensed their emotions. It was out of character for her to be unusually stern. As long as Elvinia can leave the dark region and get out of the other shore safely, I will reward you graciously. If it were anyone else who talked to him like this, Zen would probably have sent the guest out immediately. However, when Zen broke into the Phoenix Palace, it was Flamen who had showed him the way. Besides, she had also helped him in the Vastness Mountain. Zen could understand that Flamen's unreasonable demand was out of her love and worry for her beloved daughter. Zen bowed to her again. Don't worry, Lady Flamen. The dark region is not as dangerous as you think. We are not in a desperate situation. At least, in the meantime, they were safe within the column of light. What was more, those pig-faced monsters were not that intelligent. With these cards, they still had a chance to escape. Zen's sincere expression made Flamen calm down a little. The most fearful thing for her was that Zen would leave her daughter behind. All the way from the Phoenix Palace, she had been trying to figure out how she would talk to Zen. In order to get the answer she wanted, she risked being a bit rude to Zen. Chapter 2896, The Purified Being. Flamen lowered her eyes. Softly she said, I have been to the dark region. I know how dangerous it is. Maybe it's too much to ask you to protect Elvinia, but I hope you will do your best. You've been to the dark region? Zen said, raising his eyebrows. Flamen smiled. It's not the dark region of stage 13, but the one of stage 20. As one reached higher and higher stages on the other shore, the likelihood increased of encountering the dark region. Powerful warriors like Flamen, however, had extremely powerful souls of light, and were equal to the challenges of the dark region. Flamen, for instance, would have no trouble overpowering the creatures on the other shore and in the dark region that Zen and his companions had faced in Stage 13. Have you ever heard of the light column in the dark region? Zen asked. At the mention of the light column, Flamen's eyes flashed. Elvinia noticed and shot her mother a questioning look. Earlier, when Elvinia had told her mother about the light column in the Phoenix Palace, Flamen had also reacted strangely. What did she know about the valley? I've already heard about it from Elvinia, Flamen said solemnly. The appearance of a light column in the dark region, well, generally suggests the presence of a purified being. What do you mean by a purified being? Zen said, looking interested. Some creatures can break through the restrictions of the dark region and become the strongest. We call them purified beings, and no one can match them in the dark region, Flamen explained. Of course, they are also extremely powerful even outside the dark region. Many years ago, Flamen had witnessed the birth of a purified being. She had been in the dark region of Stage 20. She clearly saw a white light shoot up into the sky, pierce through the darkness, and freely fly within the dark region. In response, the powerful creatures in the dark region had surrounded the light and launched an attack on the purified being. Even the other creatures outside the dark region had tried to stop the purified being from leaving the confines of the dark region. Some powerful souls of light had also joined the battle. But no one could defeat the purified being. Within its light, it was impervious to the attacks of creatures in the dark region. The other creatures outside the dark region also failed to defeat the purified being. At that time, Flamen recalled, the most powerful group in Stage 20 was the Heavenly Element race. They had ruled over at least 70% of the territory of Stage 20. However, the purified being had engaged them in battle. Alone against the strongest members of the Heavenly Element race, the purified being had driven them into a small corner of Stage 20. Zen listened closely to the story. What does the purified being want? He asked Flamen. It wants its own race to dominate all others, Flamen said simply. The purified being I am telling you about comes from the Rain race. As far as I know, the Rain race still controls Stage 20. Once you reach Stage 20, you will see for yourself the proliferation of the Rain race. By now, they must be stronger than ever. Indeed, any mention of the beasts of the Rain race in Stage 20 was enough to strike fear into anyone in the Desire world. Few, if any, were willing to stay too long in Stage 20. Since the purified being is so powerful, why don't other races try to win it over? Zen asked. Win it over? Flamen repeated thoughtfully, I'm sure someone has tried that. But how can we, as souls of light from the source world, manage to win it over? The creatures of the source world went to the other shore primarily to obtain other shore tokens. For the creatures on the other shore tokens were nothing special. They themselves could also be considered as other shore tokens. Moreover, the purified being could dominate a whole stage. Zen reflected on what Flamen had told him. He now knew several important things about the purified being. There should have been a pig-faced monster buried in the tomb of the light column. Nobody knew how or why the pig-faced monster had turned into a purified being. Then it had attracted the light outside the dark region. Once it was reborn, it would lead its race in bloody battle. With its power, their race could become the strongest force in Stage 13. Thus the pig-faced monsters gathered around the light column and described what lay within it as a holy tomb. It was the symbol of their hopes for prospering their race. They had been afraid that Zen would desecrate it. Flamen was watching Zen. She asked directly, when will you return to the other shore? She couldn't help but feel conflicted about her daughter. If Elvinia never returned to the other shore, she would have a lifetime of safety and comfort in the Oneness Sky Palace. She could even be happy. However, her cultivation level would stagnate where it was right now and never increase again. Just like Winchel's son, Avaristus. If Zen hadn't saved him, he would still be trapped in the whirlpool. Zen said, I don't know when the purified being will awaken. So the sooner we return, the better. Once the purified being woke up, the white light that enveloped the tomb would disappear, and he and Elvinia would fall into darkness once again. They would die there unless they ate the darkness fruits. You may leave in 3 days, Flamen said slowly, biting her lips. I wish to spend more time with Elvinia before you go. Flamen appreciated Zen's strength and knew he would do his best to protect Elvinia in the dark region. However, she was horribly aware of the dangers lurking in the dark region, and knew there was a chance that her daughter would not survive. She wanted to delay sending Elvinia back to the dark region for as long as possible. Meanwhile, Athamar, Goran, and the others received the news that Zen had woken up. They immediately paid him a visit at the Oneness Mountain. Like Flamen, they were familiar with the known history of the light column. The knowledge they had was riddled with gaps and shrouded in mystery. Athamar and Goran also couldn't explain the origins of the purified being. The key point was that it had happened in the lust world. This meant that neither Athamar nor Goran could lend a helping hand. They could only offer advice, and so they repeatedly told Zen to take action cautiously. The 3 days requested by Flamen seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. Flamen personally sent Elvenia to the top of the Oneness Mountain. She concealed her anxiety from her daughter and told her to be careful in the dark region. Zen and Elvenia were fully prepared to return. They sat cross-legged on the floor, and closed their eyes. A flame rose from Zen's body. The two of them returned together to the other shore. The moment they opened their eyes, they were bathed in the glow of a bright light shining above them. The two of them were in the center of a circle of light, about 10 feet in diameter. Beyond the light was impenetrable darkness. Nothing could be seen at all. Elvenia, the darkness fruits, Zen said quickly. They were unable to see the environment of the dark region because the effect of the darkness fruits had already dissipated. Elvenia nodded and took out 2 white fruits from her space ring. She handed one of the fruits to Zen. They each bit into their fruits. As Zen swallowed the darkness fruit, he felt energy spreading throughout his body, and the darkness that obscured his vision seemed to lighten. He looked around him at their surroundings and instantly felt stunned. To his shock, he and Elvenia were surrounded by several pig-faced monsters standing just outside the edge of the circle of light. Their ferocious fangs were bared. They were staring at Zen and Elvenia, and looked ready to fight. Elvenia let out a small cry of astonishment as she saw the monsters around them. She stepped closer to Zen, feeling uneasy and afraid. "Don't worry, they can't come into the light," Zen said calmly. The pig-faced monsters leaned forward and roared, taking care to stay in the darkness. "Get out of here, you filthy humans. You are trampling the holy tomb." The pig-faced monsters roared and threatened them, but they couldn't step into the circle of light to attack the humans. Zen smiled, shaking his head. "You know, if I were them, I would be kind and gentle instead of loud and threatening. I would try to lure us out of the light and into the darkness, where we could be slaughtered like fish on the chopping block." Elvenia scowled. "Luckily, they don't have someone who thinks like you. Be quiet, don't give them any ideas." Zen shrugged. "My point is that these pig-faced monsters do not seem to be very intelligent. The black monkeys are smarter. So I don't understand why one of their own would become a purified being." As he spoke, he bent and carefully studied the holy tomb of the pig-faced monsters. According to Flamen, there was a purified being buried within. Zen placed a hand carefully on the tomb. He glanced around him at the pig-faced monsters and asked them, "Is one of your clansmen buried inside this tomb?" Chapter 2897, White Shadow. The pig-faced monsters shuddered at the mere thought of the thing they dreaded the most. Zen would aim at the holy tomb. His question rang repeatedly in their heads, which made them tremble profusely in fear. Despite that, they still had the gall to curse fiercely at Zen. "Move your dirty hand away. How dare you, a dirty human, touch Master Teague's holy tomb? Go to perdition," they all shouted. Meanwhile, their noises caused the other pig-faced monsters to come out of the caves as well. Elvenia looked at Zen solemnly. "Those pig-faced monsters are besieging us again," she reminded him. "Leave them alone," Zen replied expressionlessly. "They could leave the other shore at any time anyway. Moreover, the creatures from the dark region couldn't get inside, which meant that he could try anything he liked." He turned a deaf ear to the pig-faced monsters' cries and carelessly walked around the holy tomb. Finally, he stopped in front of it and bowed down. This action surprised Elvenia as she didn't know what Zen meant. Still, the act had now excited those pig-faced monsters. "He's finally enlightened. He's going to submit to our Master Teague. Even if you kneel down and beg for forgiveness, we can only let you die, but it is not so painful. Since you have thought through this, you can step out now." After Zen was done bowing, he stood up and smiled at the pig-faced monsters. He then suddenly jumped up to the tomb and dug it out with his hands. He knew that the only way to leave the place was to look for the answer that lay inside the tomb. He bowed to the tomb because of his moral. Whether the purified being was dead or not, it was indeed disrespectful to dig a tomb. Those ferocious pig-faced monsters were dumbfounded. They never thought that Zen would actually be so bold to dig the tomb. "Stop, please. No, we are so sorry, Master Teague." The pig-faced monsters could only cry out in despair when they realized that threatening Zen didn't work. In fact, it just irritated him. Thus, some of them began to plead with him to stop. However, Zen knew that the pig-faced monsters were never to be trusted, so he completely ignored them. Swish! He tossed away the masses of mud he had dug out until the long, thin stones below came into view. The stones were highly cold to the touch. He tried to break the stones, but failed. He couldn't believe that they were so hard that he couldn't damage them even for a little bit. Finally, he started with the side of the tomb. He took out the stones and threw them towards Elvinia, who stood not far away. The stones should contain a very potent amount of the other shore power. Since they didn't melt in the light, they could be fused as the other shore tokens. After Elvinia picked up the stones and put them in her space ring, she went by the tomb's side and carefully peered down. Once all the stones were removed, a circular cave with a diameter of 3 feet appeared beneath. The tomb is empty. Elvinia's eyes narrowed. If there was an underground passage below, they would get out of the place. "Let me get down to have a look," said Zen. Just as he was about to jump inside, that dark blue pig-faced monster showed up again beside the light column. Its angry mouth seemed to shout the words, "You will regret for what you have done." The rest of the pig-faced monsters also roared and the whole valley was blanketed in a thick fog of unease. Even the tentacles in the valley quietly retreated back to the triangular caves. However, Zen just cast a glance at the dark blue pig-faced monster before he jumped into the cave beneath the tomb. Elvinia was left alone at the tomb's entrance, her eyes filled with nervousness. Although she clearly knew that the pig-faced monsters couldn't get in, their howls that seemed to shake mountains still terrified her a little. "Let's cover the light. Block the light and get them out. Let the tentacles do this." The pig-faced monsters and the tentacles had previously dashed into the light column blindly without a thought. As a result, the light had melted their bodies in various degrees. At the moment, one of the pig-faced monsters seemed to have come up with an idea. The light was indeed powerful, but it could not destroy stones in an instant. Then all the tentacles that had retreated to the triangular caves extended to the outside of the valley and pulled the huge stones on the outside back to the inside. Whoosh! At that moment, Elvinia saw a huge dark shadow in the distance. It was a huge stone that the tentacles had thrown over her head. The giant stone naturally blocked the column of light that shone from above, casting a shadow on Elvinia. Her legs were frozen in place. She was speechless and didn't know what to do. "Catch her! Kill her! We can get in now!" The pig-faced monsters that had stayed outside for a long time had run out of patience. As soon as the stone blocked the light, they hurriedly scampered towards Elvinia. Elvinia, Zen, who had just jumped down from the tomb's entrance, felt the light above his head fade away. His face slightly turned worried. Even though he didn't know what had happened above, he knew that the light was their only protective screen. Thus, he jumped upwards without hesitation and tried to find out what happened. The only thing was, it was easy to go down but hard to go up. When he tried to rush towards the entrance, a weird force abruptly pulled him in and he fell down from a height of about 40 feet. Whoosh! As he slipped further down, 4 pig-faced monsters had already reached Elvinia in a blink of an eye. One of them reached out and grabbed her in an attempt to drag her out. In turn, Elvinia instinctively launched a counterattack. The golden light around her body flickered continuously until it turned into golden whips, which lashed at the pig-faced monsters like a violent storm. Yet, the divine flames of the Sun Crow race still wasn't enough to render considerable damage to them. "Right after we got back here. We are in danger." Despair racked Elvinia's body, and she was close to giving up. Suddenly, a beam of light glittered brightly once again. Even if the giant stone did temporarily block the light also tarnished it because it was an object of the dark region. In just a few seconds, the light had pierced through the giant stone. Buzz! The bright light shone on Elvinia again. Before the pig-faced monsters around her could scream, the light beam had melted their bodies away, filling the air with a pungent smell. The light won a little bit of time for Elvinia to breathe. Her face, however, changed dramatically when she saw the tentacles lift a number of giant stones. She would never have a chance to escape once the stones completely covered the light. Without hesitation, she quickly jumped into the cave beneath the tomb. The situation outside the cave was extremely critical, and the same could be said for inside of it. A small white shadow floated in front of Zen. It didn't contain very strong energy, but it seemed that it posed a great threat to him. It turned out that this white shadow was the force that pulled him down just now. At that point, his face twisted in horror when he realized that the white shadow had targeted Elvinia. "Watch out!" he screamed when seeing Elvinia jumping down. Chapter 2898, Cutting. There was no time for Elvinia to check the cave before jumping inside. But when she heard Zen warn her from above, she resisted on instinct, releasing golden whips from her soul of light and lashing at the white shadow that appeared before her. Swish! When she used her divine flames of the Sun Crow race on the other shore, they were like a soul theurgy. The power of the flames imposed on physical bodies was rather ordinary, but if the opponent was in soul form, their power was not to be scoffed at. And the white shadow was in just soul form. As the divine flames almost hit the figure, Elvinia felt a sudden strange force. The force sent her flying horizontally without warning. The golden whips deviated from the attack as she lost control. Bang! She hit the wall hard. Her soul of light was, of course, incomparable to Zen's. After the collision, she passed out immediately. The force exerted on her wasn't dissipating, it kept her nailed firmly to the wall. Whoosh! The white shadow didn't seem to have any intention of killing her, though. After knocking her unconscious, it flew in closer. No way! Zen had no idea what it was planning, but from its actions, he could vaguely guess what it was up to, so he didn't want it anywhere near Elvinia. The power of the strength god totem emanated from his body as he got ready to leap into the air. Over the past 3 days, he had replenished his power with a considerable amount of divine crystals. His 2 other shore tokens were in their best state. But just as he was about to jump, he felt his feet sink into the ground. What? Zen felt his heart skip a beat as he carefully examined the situation. His eyes went wide. The moment he entered the cave, the ground felt soft. He figured it was just the soil. But now that his feet were stuck, he realized that he was stepping on huge lumps of meat. In fact, the entire floor was covered by lumps of meat, with meridians separating the flesh and purple blood flowing rapidly through them. Although he had seen such passageway in the Grand Sky Temple, he knew he was in a far stranger place. His surprise lasted only a second. Seeing as the white figure was already right in front of Elvinia, he had no time to lose. 600 divine megatons of force. The other shore power of the strength god totem erupted and Zen managed to pull his feet out from in between the flesh on the ground. He rushed to the side like a slingshot stone and grabbed at the white shadow with his hands like a bolt of lightning. The figure saw Elvinia as a lifesaver. It wanted to seize the opportunity to enter her soul of light. Just then, Zen felt the light above him start dimming again. Dozens of great stones blocked the cave's entrance, enveloping them in darkness. Even light with strong penetrating power would take some time to get through the stones. The tentacles slithered along the cave walls and flocked into the dark cave. When one of Zen's hands was about to grab the white shadow, the tentacles shot out and wrapped around Zen's body. It was a horrible sight, dozens of thick tentacles entangling him and each other. As the tentacles restrained him completely, all he could do was watch as the shadow rushed into Elvinia's soul of light. Once the tentacles dragged Zen out of the cave, another group made its way into it, aiming at Elvinia. No foreign beings were allowed to exist in the holy tomb. But before they could reach her, they began trembling all of a sudden as though they had received some sort of irresistible signal. After another moment, they left Elvinia behind and retreated. The other tentacles were still holding great stones up, blocking the light from outside. It was the first time the pig-faced monsters had even gotten close to the holy tomb. All were wearing faces of reverence at that moment. Hurriedly, they bowed before the tomb and restored it before heading out. Once again, the giant stones were penetrated by the light. It reached down, shining onto the tomb. From the looks of it, save for the new soil on the tomb's surface, there were barely any traces of damage. After light broke through the stones, fragments fell and their debris turned to dust under the light before disappearing entirely. The tentacles kept pulling on Zen until they held him mid-air. They seemed to be competing for him among themselves. Each of them wanted to pull him into their own caves and devour him slowly. Each tentacle released a great force during the fight. Zen could feel his body being slowly, agonizingly torn apart. Still, his body was highly strong. If it were any other body, they'd already be in pieces. In the end, one of the tentacles won, and Zen was dragged into a triangular cave. Over 100 feet deep inside, he could smell the old, rotting blood on the walls. Clumps of fur and bones were scattered on the ground. These must be the corpses of the black monkeys from earlier, Zen thought. Zen could tell what they were from the dark fur, the 3 black monkeys that had been caught a while earlier. They were already eaten. But how did the tentacles cut through the monkey's bones? No matter how strong they were, tentacles were soft in nature. At most, they could only tear the bodies into pieces like one would tear paper. But Zen could see that the pieces of bone were cleanly cut and extremely smooth. Apparently, they were cut by some sharp weapons. While he pondered, 2 more tentacles extended from within the cave. They were slightly thinner than the others, but each had a row of sharp teeth on one side. Zen's questions about the bones were answered. Phew! The soft tentacles held Zen's body in place as the other two rushed toward him. Crack, 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 crack. As the two tentacles moved backward and forward around Zen's shoulders, their rows of teeth were like saws as they cut into Zen's body. As the cutting began, a burning pain shot through Zen's arms and his shoulders were covered in blood. The tentacles' strength was beyond anything Zen could have ever imagined. If the sawing went on, he'd be left in pieces soon. His brows furrowed tightly as he thought of his predicament. Crack, 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 crack. The tentacles continued the tortuous motion. In the second round of cutting, they had reached his flesh and muscles, the white of his bones was already visible. Chapter 2899, Soul Stealing and Counterattack. The desperate situation had Zen thinking long and hard about how to escape. There weren't many abilities he could use on the other shore. Because of its nature, the strength god totem could only increase Zen's strength. It wasn't nearly enough to force himself out of the tentacles' range. The Eye of Will's power was indeed excellent, but for it to be truly effective, it had to be combined with great swordsmanship skills. In this situation, it was practically useless. Currently, two tentacles began the third round of cutting. This time, Zen gritted his teeth and leapt on full strength. In the little window of opportunity, he managed to evade the tentacles and start running out of the cave. But the enclosure was already densely crowded with tentacles. Before he could take any more steps forward, another one hit his legs. Slap! The whip-like hit made Zen lose his balance. Before he fell to the ground, several tentacles wrapped around him, dragging him deeper into the cave. Their severe grip left him with no chance of escape. When someone entered the other shore, it was normally difficult for others to tell if their souls of light were trapped or injured. The only way to understand one's condition was to examine one's mind. But because Zen entered the other shore with his physical body, his case was another story. Any injuries he suffered on the other shore affected his real body in the source world. Zen is injured. Is he in a fight? What's happening on the other shore? I hope he's okay. Zen's body in the source world sat on the second floor of his courtyard house. His eyes were shut tightly as he cringed like he was in pain. Wounds began appearing on his body abruptly, blood even started gushing out. His condition put Letitia and Margaret in a panic. Dorothy rushed to his side and tried to help treat the fresh wounds. After sending Elvinia's body to the Flow Sword sect, Flamen stayed with them. While she couldn't see what was going on at stage 13 of the other shore, she knew that Elvinia was in a critical situation. She couldn't just leave protecting Elvinia up to Zen alone. At the sight of Zen's terrible wounds, Flamen felt a sense of foreboding. What about Elvinia? Was she with him? Was she still safe? In the next moment, Flamen was at Elvinia's side, putting her slender fingers atop the latter's forehead. Closing her eyes in concentration, she examined her daughter's soul. A solemn expression came over her face. Lady Flamen, is she all right? Dorothy asked in concern. Her soul is very weak. It seems like someone is trying to steal her soul. Now, Flamen sounded angry, gritting her teeth. What? Dorothy's eyes widened in alarm. Is there anything we can do to help her? Margaret and Letitia exchanged looks of astonishment. While they had very little knowledge of the other shore, they were well aware of the practice of stealing another warrior's soul. But never did they think such a thing could be done on the other shore as well. Maybe this creature can even enter the source world through Elvinia's body. It might be successful if I hadn't noticed it right away. Now that I've discovered it, I'm not letting it through, Flamen boldly announced as she sneered. She then pressed a hand on her daughter's head and pointed the other to her temple. A touch of demonic red colored her eyes. Such was a secret soul skill unique to her. It was highly damaging to her own soul whenever she performed it. But what choice did she have when her daughter was in grave danger? Zoom. An invisible soul power emanated from her body. Violent gusts of wind began blowing from the second floor of the house. Her soul power's fluctuation was not necessarily destructive, but all the disciples in the Flow Sword sect could sense it clearly. Their faces filled with awe as they stared at Zen's courtyard house from a distance. Everyone was well aware that only a dozen people in the entire Oneness Sky Palace were capable of releasing such a terrifying soul aura. They wondered which one of the Grand Masters had visited the Flow Sword sect. On the other shore, the white shadow went straight into Elvinia's memory flame after entering her soul of light. As the leader of the pig-faced monsters, Teague had great ambition. After he succeeded in becoming a purified being, the entire stage 13 would become his domain. Both the black monkeys and the giant ape would be at his mercy. Initially, the plan had gone smoothly. Once the flesh and soul were nourished adequately, he was to be reincarnated. Never did he think that the fate would send him such a great gift. It was a soul of light from the source world. In comparison, the other shore was narrow and limited. Creatures like him lurked in the shadows of this narrow world for generations. Dominating the stage 13 didn't do anything to change his fate. But if he managed to steal Elvinia's soul, he'd at least have a chance to return to the source world. Such was something all the other shore creatures longed for. With his current abilities, it wouldn't be long before he took control of the chaos in its entirety. At such an exciting thought, Teague did not hesitate for a moment before locking down on his target. Elvinia's memory flame flickered with a pale orange light. After she lost her consciousness, the light grew especially dim. When Teague finally found her memory flame, his ugly mug twisted into a malicious smile. Powerful creatures at his level normally had two ways of occupying a soul. First, he could destroy her memory flame and replace it with his own. With this method, however, he'd lose the original owner's memories. Second, he could devour her memory flame and integrate her memories into his. This way, he'd obtain all her knowledge and secrets as well. Both the source world and the chaos remained unfamiliar to Teague. He needed to learn about them. What better way than to understand the world through her memories? Elvinia's memory flame sensed approaching danger and swayed gently within the depths of her soul like a helpless little girl in the face of a hungry wolf. Once her memory flame was devoured, her true consciousness would vanish into thin air, something akin to death. I've already found you. Where do you think you can escape? Teague's soul smiled maliciously as he mocked her. He could almost smell the flame's fragrance. The white shadow flashed gently as it grabbed the vulnerable memory flame in its hand. It trembled violently and swayed in Teague's palm. Indeed, there was no way to escape. But just as he raised the flame to his mouth, ready to swallow it, something unexpected began unfolding. A sudden flash of scarlet golden flame appeared, preceded by beams of golden light that started spreading within her soul. Wow, what's going on? Teague's eyes were wide as they darted around, wondering what the scene before him was. Suddenly, he began groaning in pain. A burning sensation came over his palm. Before he could react, Elvinia's memory flame began scorching him, forcing him to throw it away. Realizing that something was going terribly wrong, he chose to flee. Teague was a purified being. He was at the beginning of a new life where a bright future awaited him. He couldn't afford to perish just yet. But the golden flames were spreading rapidly, far beyond his imagination. In the blink of an eye, the flames had formed a cage around him, making him a prisoner within the depths of Elvinia's soul. Chapter 2900, An Accident. It was extremely difficult for the people in the source world to influence or affect the events on the other shore. They could only offer soul pills to strengthen the soul auras of those on the other shore. The people outside Dragon City, for instance, were able to cultivate on the other shore with the help of the starlight in Dragon City despite it being an external force. Flamen couldn't intervene and help Elvinia fight the creatures on the other shore. Nor could she greatly improve her daughter's cultivation base while Elvinia was on the other shore. However, she could kill anyone who tried to snatch Elvinia's soul. In a sense, one's soul of light was both in the source world and on the other shore. Thus, after Teague entered the depths of Elvinia's soul of light, he was still on the other shore, yet he was also on the second floor of Zen's house in the Flow Sword sect in the source world. This presented Flamen with an opportunity to help her daughter. Teague had not become a purified being yet, so his soul was still quite weak. Moreover, as a creature from stage 13 of the Dark Region, he was inferior to the creatures in the upper stages of the other shore. Huge flames burned and flickered around Teague. He darted from left to right in a cage made of golden flames. Every time he tried to escape, the scorching heat forced him back inside. I'm a purified being. You can't kill me, Teague yelled in despair. Outside the cage, a faint shadow emerged. It was Flamen's soul. Elvinia's memory flame rested on her shoulder. You certainly have the aura of a purified being, said Flamen, looking at Teague cautiously. There were many powerful creatures in the Dark Region, and the purified beings were the best of them. Once they were born, they were virtually impossible to defeat. However, it remained a great mystery how and why purified beings were born. You can't kill me. If you kill me, the Blood Assembly will never let you go. Teague roared at Flamen. But you want to kill my daughter, said Flamen, whose face darkened. Threatened by Teague, she was more determined to kill him now. She waved her hand, and the golden cage shrank, closing in on Teague. The bars of golden flames pressed in on Teague's soul. He screamed in agony at the scorching pain. Several seconds passed as Teague writhed and screamed. Eventually, he collapsed and fell silent. Flamen exhaled, thinking it was over at last. However, something strange happened. Teague's white soul began to swell rapidly. It expanded within the flaming cage, becoming larger and larger. What's going on? Flamen demanded, taking a step back. She tried to bind the expanding soul in place, but she couldn't hold it down. There was a deafening bang. Teague's soul exploded. In an instant, a violent, swirling vortex appeared in its place. Flamen stumbled forwards, drawn by the gravity of the vortex. She fought against it, but it was too strong. Her soul and Elvinia's orange memory flame were inexorably sucked in. In the blink of an eye, Flamen's soul had disappeared into the vortex. In the source world, Flamen suddenly opened her eyes. She blinked and shook her head, looking furious. In a cold voice, she cried out, "How could this happen?" Dorothy had been trying to repair Zen's body. When she turned to Flamen and saw the look on her face, her own expression grew dark and forbidding. Although Flamen had not explained what had happened, Dorothy could tell that things had gone wrong. Flamen put her fingers to her temples, and golden flames appeared, shooting upwards. Her eyes were red. She wanted to go into Elvinia's mind again. But she found that a white light had enveloped Elvinia's soul. The light seemed to have completely integrated with Elvinia's soul. It wouldn't be difficult to destroy the light, but the problem was that, given this degree of integration, destroying the light would also tear apart Elvinia's soul. The two tentacles lashed at Zen's arms again. Zen felt the intense pain of the cutting from the tentacles, but to his surprise, he also felt a sensation he couldn't immediately identify. He took a closer look at his arms and realized that they were healing. However, the healing could not keep up with the amount of damage being done to his arms. They were cut, broken, and bleeding. Zen thought that the tentacles would break his bones and rip his arms apart, and then enjoy the pieces slowly. He groaned at the terrible sound of the bones in his arms cracking beneath the tentacles. Zen was overcome by agony. He was about to black out from the pain when, from outside the triangle cave, there was a loud roar. It sounded like hundreds of pigs howling together. The pig-faced monsters, Zen thought, ashen-faced. Unexpectedly, the tentacles stopped moving. To Zen's surprise, he found himself being carried out of the cave by the tentacles. He realized that the pig-faced monsters had somehow stopped the tentacles from devouring him. Zen knew that the pig-faced monsters had not acted out of benevolence. After all, he had broken into their holy tomb, and they had tried to tear him limb from limb. They must be even more furious at him now that he had dug up and desecrated the tomb. The air whooshed in Zen's ears as the tentacles swung him upwards. He was hung upside down outside the triangle cave. Everything was silent except for a dripping sound, as blood flowed down to the ground from the wounds on his arms. The pig-faced monsters stood in a line in front of Zen's battered, upside-down body. He looked miserable, yet he endured his suffering, which stoked their hatred even further. They started to speak among themselves. "We can't let him die so easily. Anyone who desecrates the holy tomb must suffer the harshest torture. This filthy human must pay for what he's done." The pig-faced monsters talked over each other, suggesting methods for punishing and torturing Zen. While they were discussing the matter, the dark blue pig-faced monster reappeared. It went to Zen and narrowed its eyes at him thoughtfully. After a moment it turned to the others and said, "Don't kill him." The pig-faced monsters let out howls of indignation. "What? Why not? This human has insulted us. He deserves to die a painful death." Zen felt a stab of relief at the declaration of the dark blue pig-faced monster, but he was also confused. The monster had wanted to swallow him alive before. Now it wanted to spare his life. What reason could there be to keep him alive? The dark blue pig-faced monster glanced at Zen and gave him a slow, malevolent smile. "We will use him as bait in the black pool." And it laughed, its beady eyes lit with malice. For a moment, the other pig-faced monsters were quiet, thinking about the proposal. Then they joined the dark blue pig-faced monster in its laughter. "Good idea. That is a fitting consequence for the one who breaks into the holy tomb. He will suffer greatly." The black pool was a forbidden area for the pig-faced monsters. Any creature sent as bait to the black pool would meet a dreadful end. Zen was apprehensive. He had no idea what the black pool was, but he could tell from the reactions of the pig-faced monsters that it would not be a good idea to enter that place. The tentacles seemed to do the bidding of the pig-faced monsters. They took out two thick bronze iron plates, obtained from the valley, which were about the size of a human being. There was a hole punched into the center of each iron plate. The tentacles lifted Zen down onto the ground. They slid Zen's neck and hands into the holes in the iron plates, and then secured the plates with two ropes. Zen struggled, but he was very weak from his injuries. When he released his other shore power, strange patterns flashed on the plates, but they stayed firmly in place. Give it up. No one can escape from the bronze seal, a pig-faced monster sneered. Zen ignored the monster, silently trying to break free. After several unsuccessful attempts, he finally gave up, deciding he was wasting his energy. He sat, trapped by the bronze seal, and stared morosely at the light column in the middle of the valley. Elvinia was still buried within the dark cave of the tomb. Her soul of light would have been entirely swallowed by the white shadow by now.